All right, we're doing this shit again. This is Real News Wednesday on the 4th of July, 2018. We are gonna fuck up the American sense of freedom and independence for the next 3 hours. So feel free to chime in, join in, and all that good shit. I have a shit ton of stories to bring up. Other people here also have some stories to bring up. So feel free to send us links in the chat. If you've got something, well, send us stories in the chat. I don't think you can send links. You can send it to me on Twitter though. If you tweet at insanity is free, I will see that tweet. But housekeeping to get out of the way. I'll be starting a new morning news show. Well, sort of morning. It's going to be morning for me and probably like early afternoon for some people. Next Monday. That news stream will require anchors. So if you're interested in becoming one of those anchors, hit me up. Those will be basically people who can guarantee that they can be on like 1 or more days a week. And you would be able to choose your own day, but it would be in a specific time slot. So just keep that in mind. Additionally, this is brought to you by Brave Browser. It's an ad-resistant, tracker-resistant browsing experience that supports creators directly, so feel free to check out the link in the description. It's also brought to you by Cash App, which is a Federal Reserve and Bitcoin wallet where you can store your dollars and your actual money. And it also allows you to spend, I believe both of those, but I might be wrong. It certainly lets you spend dollars with a custom Visa card that they send you in the mail. You can accept payments for services rendered and goods sold through this app as well, and they also have business class accounts that you can set up. It's also brought to you by Liberty mugs that you can use to piss off your coworkers. So feel free to download the Brave browser and download that Cash App, and also buy a mug to piss off your coworkers. There are also plenty of ways to support the show in the bottom link in the description. Without further ado, then, I think that gets the housekeeping out of the way. And also, I'm going to be posting periodically in the live chat the link to a GoFundMe account for somebody who's going through some shit. So I hope you support that. If you got like $1 or $2 to throw at him, please do so. He needs some help right now. He's going through some shit that he needs some help with, and I think he has some potential to move on. He's actually been on this show a few times, so I want to pay it forward in a bit. So if any of you can do that, feel free to. Additionally, I'm getting some hardware from somebody who wanted to support the show, which should enable me to do much better streams through that hardware. Because the problem with my old shit, not to get too technical, is that I started to overload my CPU by even trying to do what some of these other streamers do. I think this should be less likely to happen with this particular piece of hardware. So if you want to watch the show as it develops into something behemoth, feel free to do so. Heidi Lore, Conspiracy Chick, already says hi, y'all. Hey, pleasure to see you in the chat. Hope to see you in all of our chats relatively soon. And if you ever decide that you want to come on, let me know. I can send you a link. Let's get into the introductions, I guess. We got 3 people on so far and several more interested. Why don't y'all tell people where you can be found, what you do, and who you are?
I'll go first. Mine's usually the shortest. I'm Conan. My dad's kind of famous. I'm kind of not. My whole goal is to help those that realize that the state is a bad thing to find ways to minimize the effect they have in contributing to the state. All of us, whether we wish it or not, the vast majority of us do contribute to evils that the state performs. So my goal is, once people have made that recognition, to help them find ways to minimize that, and even potentially in the future to reverse it. I refer to it as minimizing your state's footprint, minimizing the ability you give the government through the fruit of your labor to harm people. Sort of a subset of agorism, if you will. I also am performing a segment that's going to be found on several different podcasts, Conan the Destroyer. It's where I take popular ideas, news, subject, and individuals of the day and I crush them with good old critical thinking and my fair share of snark and sarcasm. And that's me.
Anyone can go next, no particular order.
Sorry, I was just reposting. I'm Lupinate. You can find me on Minds as Lupinate and Discord as well, and on Steam as Anarchic Wolf. And I just basically mainly talk shit about reality. And this week we'll hopefully be presenting a "It's not all doom and gloom" section of the news.
And I'm Cape Codpiece. You can find me on Twitter at Cape Codpiece. I'm currently active duty military, transitioning out in November. I arrived at anarcho-capitalism / voluntarism, same way a lot of people do, through normie libertarianism, capital L. And I too am a big fan of agorism, and I will be scaling up my particular brand of agorist activity once I'm in the civilian world. Hope to see you there.
That's funny. Most people start off as libertarians and turn into feds. You start off as a fed and turn into a libertarian.
You'd be surprised how many of that happens to.
Yeah, like I mean, DeCarlos Danger was a Navy operator, and I believe, and fucking Skip, the free rifleman, he was a Fed. I think once you're in there and you see how little of a shit they actually give about you and or preserving freedom, you start to see like the lines being drawn to various interests, and you start to see that they're really fucking you over in a major way. So let's start with looping it. I think that'd be a good idea because I'm about to get real heavy, and I think it'd be good to start off with something a little lighter.
Oh, goody. Okay, well, all right, everybody, to do the, as it were, the morning news bulletin with all the puppies and everything, I bring to you something from reliefweb.int, a article focusing on Africa, specifically what peace between Eritrea and Ethiopia will mean for the Horn of Africa. So one of the longest running wars may actually finally be ending. This is from a Johannes Gedamu, lecturer of political science at Georgia Gwinnett College. And it was published 28th June. No one saw it coming, but a lasting peace deal may have finally arrived for Ethiopia and its longtime sparring partner, Eritrea. The two countries, which share a common culture, language, and history, have been at odds for years. The conflict came to a head in May 1998 when the two countries went to war over the border town of Badme. Both wanted it on their side of the border. A peace deal, the Algiers Peace Accord, was signed by both parties after 2 years, but neither side complied with it for the next 16. But there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Ethiopia's new premier, I'm going to mispronounce this so badly, Abiy Ahmed, has promised to fully comply with the accord. This means he is willing to end hostilities between the two countries and pave the way for peace. Ahmed has also promised to accept the outcome of a 2002 Border Commission ruling, which awarded the disputed territories, including the town of Badme, to Eritrea. On Eritrea's part, the country's president, Isaias Afewerki, recently announced that he's ready to talk peace with Ethiopia. An Eritrean delegation has since landed in Ethiopia for talks. And the welcome ceremony for the three-member Eritrean delegation indicated how much Ethiopia wanted to end the current status quo of animosity. By accepting Ahmed's olive branch, Afewerki showed his readiness to engage in a conflict resolution process that could potentially end the most damaging interstate conflict in the Horn of Africa's contemporary history. Shortly after his announcement, Eritrea's anti-Ethiopian rebels, known as the Gimbot 7, declared their readiness to end armed struggle with Ethiopia. If the conflict resolution process succeeds, it will signal a new hope for the entire region. A lasting peace between Ethiopia and Eritrea will provide much-needed stability in the Horn of Africa, where competing global political dynamics are often at play. There's a little bit of the history of the region. Ethiopia's military regime, led by Colonel, I am really sorry to all the people of Ethiopia and Eritrea, by the way, because I know I am going to mispronounce these. Colonel Mengistu Haile Mariam was overthrown in 1991. The rebel forces, including the Tigray People's Liberation Front and the Eritrean People's Liberation Front, joined forces to defeat Mengistu and played a major role in bringing systemic change to Ethiopia. After this victory, the Eritrean People's Liberation Front actively pursued its long-held aspiration to administer the state of Eritrea, which then formally seceded in 1993. Meanwhile, the Tigray's People Liberation Front led the formation of a four-party coalition known as the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front, which has governed Ethiopia ever since. The two ruling parties enjoyed a promising honeymoon period in the transitional years after Mengitsu's ouster. Ethiopia used Eritrea's Red Sea port for its import-export trade. Eritrea's government continued to use Ethiopia's currency, the birr, but it wasn't long before the Ethiopian regime started questioning the Eritrean regime over a series of its fiscal and political policies. Relations began to sour and quickly deteriorated to the point of war, which first broke out in May 1998. Because the short border had never been demarcated, because their short border had never been demarcated, Eritrea land claimed to, I think that was a bit off, and invaded Badme. The invasion developed into a full-blown conflict, claiming the lives of hundreds of thousands of soldiers from both sides. It was disastrous for both sides. Meles Zenawi, then Ethiopia's premier, and President Afwerki oversaw the destruction of the two struggling economies. They also created a humanitarian crisis in the region. Both nations engaged in regional proxy wars, most notably in Somalia, and both countries hosted anti-regime rebel forces from other sides. The former Ethiopian Prime Minister Hailemariam Desalegn, who ruled from 2012 to early 2018, was unable to engage meaningfully with Eritrea for a variety of reasons, including stiff resistance from the old guard among political elites and a lack of response from Eritrea. This impasse led to a stalemate between the two countries, which became known as no war and no peace. Ethiopia's new premier is showing stronger resolve by promising to enforce the Algiers Peace Accord and by accepting the Boundary Commission's decision on Ethiopia-Eritrea border demarcation. Luckily for Abiy, Afwerki has responded positively. Peace and economic stability in the Horn. The conflict between Ethiopia and Eritrea has had a stabilizing influence on the Horn of Africa. One point of contention has been Ethiopia's military presence in Somalia. Backed by the West, the country's military is supporting the Somali government to fight al-Shabaab. Eritrea has criticized this intervention, claiming that Ethiopia's presence in Somalia is doing more harm than good. For its part, Ethiopia has accused Eritrea of supporting terrorists. Over the years, this proxy war between the two countries has had the potential to spark regional conflict. The conflict between Ethiopia and Eritrea has also spilled into neighboring Djibouti. Djibouti, which is one of Ethiopia's main economic allies, has been engaged in a war with Eritrea over a disputed border at Demiria Mountain and Demiria Island, which are claimed by both countries. The area is one of the world's busiest shipping routes and has long been recognized as a part of Djibouti. Ultimately, the prospect of peace between Ethiopia and Eritrea is likely to have a calming effect on the Horn. If stability is achieved, Ethiopia, a country with an estimated population of over 100 million, could realize its potential as a regional economic and military power. This is political capital that it could use to transform the region into a united economic powerhouse. Regional efforts to integrate economically have already started, with the governments of Ethiopia and Djibouti leading the charge. Prime Minister Ahmed has also reached an agreement with Kenya to partner on port development projects. The Premier has also signed port development and economic agreements with Somaliland. Similar agreements have been reached with Somalia. In the same vein, Eritrea has opened as an opportunity to rehabilitate its economy by reviving its ties with Ethiopia. And that's the end of it all. So, yeah, peace in the Horn of Africa, guys. That's not something I was expecting to see.
That's a very big deal.
That's a huge deal.
They'll find some oil there shortly.
Mate, your lack of hope is inspiring for all those items. Honestly, it really is.
Well, hey, think about it like this.
Proper peace accords.
If they do find oil and all of a sudden the Fed's all going to go running in there, we know two things. Number one, a strong, united Eritrea, Ethiopia with political allies in places like Somaliland, Kenya, and Somalia is going to be a much more difficult foe to separate because for obvious reasons that we just got through explaining, they've had their share of civil war and they see how that goes. Number two, we didn't do so good in the Mogadishu. So all things, I mean, these Somalis, they got women walking around in sandals carrying RPGs on their shoulders and shit. Like, I really don't see it going down. Like, every time someone's like, well, a bunch of rednecks in Alabama can never defend against the Somalia. That's just what I say. I cut them. I get to the Somalia before they do. I just say, Mogadishu, don't miss me with that shit. You motherfuckers couldn't take home if you wanted it.
And on similar possibly
Vietnam.
positive grounds, what I was going to bring up is this post on Activist Post, which is U.S. military officially ends 70-year presence in South Korea's capital city. The U.S. military has formally ended a 70-year presence in the South Korean capital of Seoul on Friday with the opening of a new military headquarters for further south in the city of Pyongyang. I think that's how you pronounce that. The U.S. has had forces in Seoul since shortly after World War II. The new base is further south and therefore out of the range of North Korean artillery. The relocation has been planned for some time, though the priorities clearly lessened with North Korean talks to relocate its artillery and peace talks underway. Still, U.S. military bases are presenting the new base as proof of a long-term commitment to South Korea, a commitment that may not have any practical justification if the peace process is completed. The base cost $10.8 billion, and U.S. officials are emphasizing that the South Koreans paid 90% of that. Pyongyang is a port city in the western coast of South Korea. The new base, Camp Humphreys, is intended to accommodate 43,000 people by the end of 2022. South Korean officials have said that they are keen to keep a large U.S. military presence in their country, largely believing it is an economic boon for the host city. So that's possibly good news. Just sort of like yours is possibly, because I can't just say it's good news. I know too much about how this stuff sometimes goes down. Like, there's a peace talk for a short bit, and then there's not. One moment Trump is saying, confiscate the guns first and worry about due process later. The next he's like throat deep on the cock of an NRA official. So I mean, it's all possibly gonna change tomorrow, but it seems possibly good on the surface.
If nothing else, it at least shows the world that it's possible, so that if it does get snatched out from under us, we're less likely to roll our eyes and say, oh, well, that's what's happening. And we're more likely to say, wait, this could have been a really good thing, but some statist tyrant fucked it up. So even if it does go south, it does have the potential to, if nothing else, at least awaken people to the fact that we don't have to constantly murder people over such trivialities, and we don't have to have a state to do these things. It also chalks right up there with how much good the state does versus how much harm they do, and that scale tally, which honestly to an individualist is irrelevant. You can stop at a traffic light and let 100 people walk across the street. The fact that you run a light and kill someone those other 100 people doesn't justify or excuse that one heinous act. But the point still remains. It is, even if it does fall through, it shows people what could be, what can be, and what ought to be. And I think that's a good thing, no matter how it turns out.
Yeah, sure. It establishes a positive baseline, to be sure. What do you think, Aaron?
My inner pessimism is trying really hard not to come out. um, as far as the peace in North Korea goes, we'll most likely maintain permanent bases, if not expand them, because there's still Russia there, and China. And the situation in the South China Sea is only getting worse and worse. So we might have put out that fire, maybe, but we're stoking another one further down south. As far as Ethiopia and Eritrea, I actually didn't know a whole lot about that conflict, but I talked to an Uber driver who's from Eritrea, and he kind of gave me the dime version of that. So I'm happy to see that two countries that have been at war for forever are talking about peace. I think that's a good deal, and anything that can stabilize that entire region is a good thing. But my inner pessimist says there's rare earth metals and diamonds, so I don't expect too much to come from it.
They'll need
That's
freedom.
why now is the time to set up Ancapistan in Somaliland. I'm telling you, we could incorporate it. Do it now, so that whenever they do realize the precious minerals are there and they want to send the feds, it's too late. We already got McNukes.
They got the rare earth metals for it. But no, seriously, that conflict has been Eritrea has been a absolute nightmare. I mean, for one thing, a country is in a bad way when they have to put in their tax law that all expats owe them tax for any foreign earnings. And there are only two countries that do this. One of them was Eritrea. The other one's the United States. So just bear that in mind. They're so desperate for money now in the US that they have to require expats fund them if they make anything over a certain amount for in a foreign nation, even if they make nothing in the US.
I'm not completely sure that it's a matter of financial desperation that the United States enacted this. It's possible, but I believe based on previous experience, it's more likely that this is a form of a power play. They want to show people you can't, if you don't like it, just leave. Well, fine, I will. Oh, no, you don't, bitch. Not so fast. I really think that's what's going on there. They want you to know you're not going to get away from us. You're not going to go somewhere else and make your wealth and generate it in peace. You're not. You're going to pay them and you're going to pay us. It's like being a pimp with long distance access. It's a horrible, horrible thing, but I do believe it has more to do with power and control and less to do with some attempt to scramble wealth. As stupid as they are on the lower levels, the higher ups aren't dumb. I think we talked about that last Sunday. That's what this is. This is a power play. What they don't want is a mass exodus. Because what do we all us free marketeers say? What do we say? Well, if you tax the shit out of them, they're just going to go somewhere else where they have more favorable conditions to run their business. This is a literal reaction to that practical solution. And I think they just wanted to nip that in the bud before a mass exodus started to occur, and it would have been too late to stem the flow. I think it's damage control.
Yeah, and to be very specific, let's go back to the activist post for something a little bit more recent. Facebook algorithm flags the Declaration of Independence as hate speech. Over the last couple of years, major social media news and video platforms have been actively engaged in the censorship of what they believe to be fake news and information, often spearheaded by third-party review organizations known to have biased views. There have been countless examples of unpopular speech and commentary that has been seen its distribution suppressed or outright banned. While there is most certainly a human element involved in the review and flagging of information, mega Silicon Valley conglomerates have also implemented automated systems to identify potentially hateful and repulsive content. To give you an idea of the kind of information in play, and what words and ideas are being identified as running in contrary to the principles of media aggregators and distributors, consider that Facebook recently banned America's founding document from being posted. Since June 20th, and this is a quote from Reason.com, since June 24th, the Liberty County Vindicator of Liberty County, Texas, has been sharing daily excerpts from the Declaration in the run-up to July 4th. The idea was to encourage historical literacy among the Vindicator's readers. The first 9 of such posts to the project went up without incident, but past 10, writes Vindicator managing editor Casey Stinnett, did not appear. Instead, the Vindicator received a notice from Facebook saying that the post goes against our standards on hate speech. The post in question contained paragraphs 27 through 31 of the declaration, the grievance section of the document, wherein the put upon colonists detail all the irreconcilable differences they have with King George III. Sternett says that he cannot be sure which exact grievance ran afoul of Facebook's policy, but he assumes that it's paragraph 31, which excoriates the king for inciting domestic insurrections among us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages. The removal of the post was an automated action, and Stennett sent a feedback message to Facebook with the hopes of reaching a human being who could then exempt the Declaration of Independence from its hate speech restrictions. The Vindicator took a screenshot of the post removal. According to the Vindicator, the post was eventually restored after it was manually reviewed. So, yeah, I mean, it seems fairly evident that the U.S. does not want people to expatriate because their platforms will remove things that are even, and by there I mean the CIA-funded platforms like Facebook will remove even the founding documents, which, by the way, is a very good thing, because if the people knew how much worse the U.S. government was than what King George was, and they had any sympathy to the founders at all, maybe they'd actually fucking do something about it.
Maybe. Probably not. There's something good on TV this afternoon.
Yeah. Well, and that good thing on TV is partially funded by the state anyway, so whatever.
See, your pessimism is rubbing off on me, Jeremiah.
That's my job to prevent that from happening.
Well, you got a landslide.
It helps.
You got a landslide right now. You gotta find another positive news story to bring up here.
Well, they found those 4 kids, that entire troop of children in a bloody...
Oh, yeah.
Although, I say that's a good news story. There are a couple of problems with it. One, they've had to send them 4 months' worth of food. So that gives you an idea of how long they think they're going to be trapped under there. And they got another batch of monsoons coming. So... they've got and their current plan, and I'm not making this up, is to teach the children how to dive in caves. Now, okay, I agree that probably is the only solution in this situation. I mean, got like 1.5 kilometers of ground above you, and it's very loose soil. So trying to excavate that, you'll probably collapse something on top of these poor kids.
Yeah.
If the rains don't do it themselves.
And of course, the kids were already sort of emaciated, so.
Yeah, I mean, they needed the food, don't get me wrong. And now they've got it. Hopefully they're stuffed to the brim and can actually learn how to dive with gear. And
or we could just take an Alabama... I mean, why don't we just get an Alabama scuba instructor from Mobile to go under there with an erector set? We'll have the whole thing set and locked and loaded in like a week. It's just thought. I mean, I joke, but there's a kernel of seriousness there, in that when standard measures fail, that's where it's time to improvise. If the most logical solution is a 90% fatality odd, then you need to get rid of the most obvious solution and consider the unorthodox. Teaching children how to do something that trained adult professionals who spent hundreds of hours to learn is not a good idea. Spelunking is what that is. Underwater cave diving is what we're talking about. It's spelunking. Yeah. It's the most. It's horribly dangerous. It's far more dangerous than skydiving. To my knowledge, it's the most dangerous common pastime as far as extreme activities that you can think of, more than mountain climbing, more than free diving, it's extremely dangerous. There has to be a more logical solution. Perhaps some rudimentary training on how As far as training on diving, yeah, train the kids on how to use their breathing apparatus and train them on how to use their diving equipment. But if there is an avenue for those children to get out, then that means there's an avenue for a trained professional spelunker or a team of spelunkers to get in. I know plenty of spelunkers who risked their lives to find the bones of children and adults who died thousands of years ago in South America and Central America. I'm quite confident you could get a competent crew of individuals to train and instruct these children in how to use their equipment. And then upon the day, okay, it's D-Day. This is where we could have the same team spelunk go into the kids, map out the entire route with rope and cordage, which is how spelunking is done anyway, and simply have the kids who have only had to focus on learning how to use their breathing apparatus and their flippers and their weights can get out of there. I just think that there's a more logical solution than just telling these kids, good luck, go spelunking. I just don't see it.
No. That's not what they're doing, mate. Just to reiterate, first off, I should have clarified this perhaps and pulled up. The thing is I've been watching this one because it's big over here in Britain. Not sure why, but it really is.
Because Brett's like a human interest story to distract from how terrible everything is, and small children in dire situations is a good ooh shiny.
Yeah, good. Yeah, fair point. It is a good ooh shiny. Yes, the kids have been given 4 months worth of food. They have not been just abandoned. Second, what you described is what's going on. A bunch of independent people have basically volunteered loads of support from all across the world. Basically, what you described is going on. There's a worldwide effort from both aid groups and individual spelunkers, including at least 3 professional Brits in like the cave diving force.
A
gone
shame.
over to Thailand
All
and
I'm gonna say is it's a shame that people can't devote this much effort to the children who regularly die from starvation in the U.S. due to poor economic conditions, to the children who are dying overseas being bombed. You know, I mean, it's just a real shame that people are only able to focus on really, really obvious and bright, shiny situations like this.
I personally was expecting them to be finding bodies. So the fact that those bodies were still had beating hearts in them, I think is a positive.
Yeah, sure. I'm
Fact
just
that
saying
people are being distracted by this shiny is something we need to ask, well, what else has been going on? So I'm going to start looking at some legal things while you pull up some more stories, guys.
Sure. I'd also like to highlight the fact that this is another example of several individuals who are voluntarily offering their labor and risking their lives and willing to donate money and effort because this stuff costs money, you know. And people ask how these things can be accomplished, and people always tell me that I'm naive when I say, look, the majority of people are good at heart. Whether you're good or evil is depicted upon your actions that you choose. That's it. But most people have good hearts, at least decent hearts. You don't have to. Good ideas don't require force. People will, when the cause occurs, people will rise to meet it. We're still here, right? We're not extinct. And that's a good point that I would make from that is.
Well, I would say not all good ideas require force, but you know, because I liked that at one point, that idea. I just have to say this because I heard it a lot somewhat recently, and I think I might have even said it too, even though I sort of disagree with it. So not all good ideas require force, but if you're on my property, threaten to rape my family, my good idea of keeping my family safe is going to require some force, maybe.
Okay, I'm assuming that I'm talking to other voluntarists and anarchists, and maybe the occasional token minarchist you bring on the show, so I can kick them around. I'm assuming I'm speaking to people that understand that using force to defend yourself and your property is totally acceptable. So in that regard, with that assumption made that everyone understands that, then yes, good ideas don't require force.
Right.
I think you're just being a contrarian, Jeremiah. I suspect.
Well, like,
how dare you?
Because I have this specific idea of how information could best be conveyed. So I don't know, like maybe it's too specific and like, because I know what you mean. I know that like good ideas can be communicated effectively enough that like most people won't need any sort of force to back them up. The good ideas will become popular enough that people won't use any force to get them popular. You know, I like that idea. I very much do. I just, you know, I do have to be somewhat specific, especially since if I'm going to be specific with statists, I have to be specific with other people. It's not like once you join anarchy, all the pressure's off. I think there's more pressure on an anarchist to be specific than statists, because statists they have all the leeway as long as they're done doing their partisan shit. So, you know, it's nothing like specifically personal or targeted. It is a little contrarian, though, I'll admit.
No, I get it though. I get the point. You deal with a lot of people in a lot of circles, and sometimes statists and comms and whatever you want to call them will it be intentionally obtuse. You know, well, what if the gun consents and dumb shit like that? So I get it. You have to be very, very selective with your words, because otherwise you get stuck in a 45-minute Twitter argument with some commie who doesn't even understand what property is, but he's going to try to argue with you about what force is. I get it.
Yeah, and of course, then they'll quote me later, and that's not an argument against what I'm saying. But you know, I do want to be consistent as much as possible. So, but yeah, on the level of what about the children, let's dive right into this. Court rules school can use electric shock as punishments for special needs students. And that's not false. That's like, this is totally real. Bristol County, Massachusetts. Family court judge Catherine Field denied a motion to stop the use of electric shock on disabled students, a form of punishment that has been controversial for years after news of the practice first reached the public in 2013 when video surfaced of an 18-year-old student receiving dozens of shocks for refusing to take off his jacket. The state failed to demonstrate that there is now a professional consensus that the level 3 aversive treatment used at JRC does not conform to the accepted standard of care for treating individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, Judge Field wrote in a decision. The facility in question is the Judge Rotenberg Educational Center, a special needs day and residential school in Canton, and it is the only school in the county that still uses electric shocks on its students. Records show that at least 58 students at the school have received shocks as of August 2017. Despite the obvious ethical concerns with this practice, there is a cult-like support among the staff and even some parents for what they call aversive treatment. A statement from the JRC Parents Group reads, as parents whose children attend and receive treatment at the Judge Rotenberg Educational Center, we welcome the court's ruling and repudiation of Massachusetts government officials at the Department of Developmental Service who had acted in bad faith and impermissibly made treatment decisions for JRC clients, our children, just as officials within the agency had done in the 1980s and 1990s. However, the students being subjected to this abuse obviously disagree, and there are several former staff members who are now speaking out against the use of electric shock. Whistleblower Greg Miller, who taught at the facility from 2003 to 2006, told Mass Live that he truly believed that this barbaric therapy was saving lives. I believed in that place at first because I was told that it was the only place in the world that could really save these kids' lives, and most of them would be dead if they weren't hooked up to the electric shock, Miller said. Miller said that electric shock was used on students for the smallest infractions, even something as small as standing up or speaking without permission. Eventually, he began to observe that the students were horrified of the shocks and they were rarely aggressive enough to require such a painful punishment. I was seeing more and more ways I could do something other than shock the students, Miller said. Miller ultimately quit, unable to cope with the ethical dilemma that came along with the job. The use of shock therapy has been proven to be ineffective, and it is not used very often because other treatments work much better. People don't use it anymore because they don't need to. It is not the standard of care. There are alternative procedures that do not involve aversives like electronic shock, and I am not talking about drugs as an alternative. I'm talking about other behavioral treatments. Dr. William Pelham, a behavioral specialist and director of the Center for Children and Families at the State University of New York at Buffalo, told the New York Times. The things that have taken place at JRC have prompted calls for the FDA to ban the use of electric shock as a punishment for students, but the FDA has ignored the issue and even had protesters arrested for attempting to raise awareness about the issue outside of their headquarters. There you go.
So before we go, two things. Number one, first the joke, then the serious. Number one, Jeremiah, we've talked about this, man. Coke before the show, Coke after the show, not Coke during the show. All right, we've been over this. I'm just kidding because you were sniffling a lot.
Okay. So that's because I'm having something really dairy filled, and I'm like gaining mucus. So, and
Hey,
I'm
man.
also snorting about a brick of Coke. So.
Normally, I would say, look, there's no feds here. You can be honest with us. But then I realized that we're libertarian. So there probably are feds among us. So, hey, man, it's your lie. I'm going to let you tell it. But to the point at hand, though, I would like to ask real quick before anyone comments, just real quick, yes or no, if anyone does. Do any of you happen to know someone who has been administered to electroshock therapy?
No, but this, keep in mind, this isn't electroshock therapy. This is electric shocks as punishment.
Oh, sure. I understand that. I've never even heard of electroshock disciplinary actions before. That's why I'm asking if anyone knows anyone. The only method I know of it being used is for electroshock therapy. But does anyone know a person who's had this administered by chance?
I do not. I do not have any knowledge of anybody in my experience, unfortunately.
What about you, Aaron? You ever heard of that being used as the torture method for the military?
No, I haven't. I mean,
yeah, so they won't even do that to terrorists.
I don't know what they do in Guantanamo Bay. They probably do it, but not that I know of. No.
Yeah, gotcha.
But they're not supposed to.
Yeah.
See, this is the thing. Electroshock therapy has been effectively discredited since. Oh my God.
Well, electroshock therapy
1800.
has, but not electroconvulsive therapy. There is a difference.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, just wanted to, because and I had somebody comment this because they were a therapist who's seen this ECT done very successfully for So I did want to be
can work. EST does not.
Right, and this is specifically not even therapy. It's aversion. It's designed to say, "Fuck you, you didn't do what I said, so now you get a shock."
No, what this is technically is basically the human version of a shock collar.
Yeah, it is.
That's exactly what it is.
So they're trying to train humans to be dogs. That's basically what they are trying to create, bitches. That's what we are saying here.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Good to know.
Just to be clear, I'm not advocating for violence towards any government official. I would never, ever do such a thing. But according to the non-aggression principle, one would be well within their rights to walk into the school building, shoot the principal, and then, of course, summarily execute every single member of the administration from the superintendent up to the highest level that you can reach, based on the fact that this has already gone through an entire due process and has been signed off on. At that moment, every single person that has signed off on this is culpable. And any person would be well within their rights to defend people who are children and two mentally deficient. So in that regard, if one were to just start lining people up and executing them, throwing them out of helicopters, whatever, you would be, ethically speaking, according to the non-aggression principles, well within your rights. It's not the same as just going and shooting a random cop because some cop somewhere did something wrong. These are actual people who have practiced this horror, and these are people who have defended it, fought it. They have arrested people for protesting it, and they have used the status system to uphold it. So for that reason, all peaceful avenues have been exhausted. One would be well within their rights to just start executing people.
But absolutely don't do it. And we would never advocate for anything similar to that, but don't do that.
No, don't do that at all.
No, that is not a recommendation that we are making.
Well, I'm not going to tell you not to do it. I suggest you not do it. I don't have the right to tell you what to do, but I'm just going to suggest you not do it.
Yeah.
And in a hypothetical situation, if I had a terminal illness and knew I was going to die anyway and wouldn't, be around anymore to support my family,
there might be very little that stops you from it.
Hypothetically, I might consider doing that. Hypothetically, of course. But I would never, ever, ever do that, especially not a state official.
because you know, I just have to bring that back. I have to bring it back to a nice pessimistic level because we're talking about kids being saved, and there's an entire school of kids being shocked as punishment. So I can't just be nice. But
I mean, you could just be nice, but no one would listen to your show then. So
you know, I might have more listeners. I mean, Philip Franco's huge because he's middle of the line. So
yeah, well, no, you either gotta, I don't know, man. Me personally,
balance in
I
all
like you as a
things.
badass person.
well, and you know me, I'm here for the long haul. If they want to censor me on this platform, I'll move and I'll make more views elsewhere. I'll be able to destroy shit eventually. So
Yeah, I'm sorry if I do get you booted for talking about shooting people. My
I
bad.
already use terrorist buzzwords. Like that's the thing. The YouTube algorithm goes through with a bot and like listens to the video. What it does, like when it processes it, it scans the text that they do for their default captions, and that's the real reason. By the way, the captions are there. It scans the text of their default captions and sees if there's anything noteworthy to you know bring up to
That
administrators.
explains why they utterly suck at stopping all the ISIS decapitation videos from popping up all over YouTube all the time.
Right.
I'm telling you, man, I can't just let YouTube fly for more than 3 hours because if I do, just let it do its own thing, I'll see a fucking ISIS video pop up with some people getting their heads chopped off. But that's because there's no text to connect it. That actually makes perfect sense on why it would so easily slide through their algorithm until it got mass reported.
Yeah, because their algorithm isn't an object recognition algorithm; it's a text recognition algorithm. So, but yeah, on that level, Lupin, it says he'll be back in a short bit. He's AFK, probably just grabbing a drink or something. Let's talk history news. Yesterday marked the 30-year anniversary of the time the U.S. shot down a passenger plane, killing 290 civilians and covered it up. This is on the freethoughtproject.com, which if anybody has not been there yet, please do. They do fantastic work, and I automatically tweet all their shit.
Oh yeah, they're the best.
And it says on July 3rd, 1988, the United States killed 290 innocent Iranian civilians when it shot down Iran Air Flight 655, a tragic event that is not mentioned in history textbooks in school and that is widely ignored in the context of current relations between the US and Iran. The scheduled flight was traveling from Tehran to Dubai, and there were 66 children on board, all of whom were killed as no passenger or crew members survived the attack. The plane was shot down by the USS Vincennes, which was operating within Iranian territorial waters. It targeted the large Airbus A300 and then insisted that crew members mistook it for F-14 fighter jet, despite the obvious difference in size. At that time, Iraq and Iran were engaged in a bitter war that was declared by Saddam Hussein on September 22nd, 1980. The United States' support for Iraq in the conflict is notable because it would later go on to overthrow Hussein in 2003. The Iraq-Iran war was horrific, and in the 8 years that it lasted, estimates claim that at the very least 500,000 and possibly twice as many troops were killed on both sides. At least 500,000 became permanent invalids. The cost of the war was around $228 billion, and it resulted in more than $400 billion in damages. The United States' involvement stemmed from its support for Iraq, and at a time when the Reagan administration considered Iran to be a bitter enemy, and so it instead chose to support Hussein in order to influence the conflict. As reports have noted, the U.S. used Iraq as a surrogate for policy in the Persian Gulf region, as it prevented the United Nations from imposing economic sanctions on Iraq and defended the use of chemical weapons on Iranian civilians. Then in 1988, the U.S. did the unthinkable by shooting down the flight, which Iran claimed was a scheduled flight that was transmitting all of the necessary signals to show that it was a passenger plane and not a military aircraft. William C. Rogers III was a captain of the USS Vincennes during its first time at combat on that fateful day, and while he was not controlling the U.S. Navy's most expensive surface warship, which reportedly was powerful enough to shoot down up to 200 incoming missiles at once, he instead targeted a passenger plane. So there's plenty more in that article, but yeah, that's a fairly good anniversary to have, I'd say.
4th of July is a hell of a day to mention that article, isn't it?
Oh yeah. Well, and it's always fun to mention like the plot that was wrought by U.S. intelligence. I forget exactly what it was, and I think it's one of the articles I have pulled up here. But like they were planning to bomb something, and I can't precisely remember what it was. But that's a specific anniversary on July 4th. So
Ain't no flag like a false flag.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, what do you got to say, Navy man? What are your thoughts, sir? I'm interested to hear, Aaron.
Well, again, what year did that happen?
It was 30 years ago before like this last Tuesday. So it was 30 years ago on July 3rd.
Yeah, that either came from somewhere other than the chain of command on the ship, or it can be attributed to the very real stupidity of just the crew on watch at the time.
We'll also keep in mind they tried to cover it up, and if you're gonna
Oh yeah, definitely.
if you're gonna assassinate somebody on a plane, you know, who's just a passenger on that plane, but maybe has info that you don't want getting out, maybe saying, "Whoops, we accidentally did that," so that people focus on the deaths of all those people instead of that one person you were trying to get, is a good enough like reason to cover up that sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely. Which would entail it coming from somewhere outside of that ship's chain of command.
Yeah.
Which wouldn't surprise me. I mean, we on my deployment we got stuff like that all the time. Nothing crazy. Just like, you know, doing our regular deal where we're going around the Persian Gulf and just boarding ships and checking what they got. I mean, if we get intelligence, we get intelligence. And I don't know how far they'd be willing to go. And well, actually, I do know. Yeah, they would kill somebody. But it could also be attributed to just the stupidity of the watch team and Navy PR trying to save face and trying to cover it up. I mean,
Right.
you would.
I have a question, if you don't mind, with your experience. Fair warning, this is a sarcastic rhetorical question. Where exactly does the CIA fit into the chain of command? Since you make the mention.
I mean, we get a message on our secret side. It is what it is. We don't really ask who's sending it, or you know, as long as they're in the chain of command, it's there.
Wow, that's spooky.
Yeah, I mean, you got people that come on board a ship and say, "Hey, we're from wherever, and we need to do this." And the captain doesn't really have a choice but to say, "Okay."
Yeah. Well, and it's
Seriously?
bureaucracy too.
Yeah. Well, that's one thing that the Navy has managed to get pretty good about is when it comes to that, there really is no bureaucracy. It goes from, you know, whoever up top, whether it's in the Pentagon, filters down only a few levels, and nothing really gets lost in translation that much. That happens on the ship, like when things filter from the captain to, let's say, me, then it might become like a phone game type thing.
So for our Ancapistani Navy, my plan is to give captains full autonomy of their vehicles. And if they don't follow their orders or commands, I will just exercise my power to withhold my top tier escort services when they come to port. I got a feeling that's going to encourage them to follow the appropriate orders.
I mean, that's
my
pretty
game
much what they
plan.
did back in the day. They just commissioned private ships, fitted them, and you know, said, "Hey, we need this blown up. Here's a contract." And I mean, that was the whole Barbary Coast deal.
Mm.
Oh, yes. So it was. Though I have to admit, if I were there in that time, chances are I wouldn't have been fighting for what most people consider the good guys, but that's life.
It's a shame I stepped away at this point or earlier because I'm interested in understanding how the conversation came here.
Oh, back in the day, a Navy ship shot down a passenger airline in Iran. You're probably familiar with it. Killed a lot of innocent people. We were just speculating on whether it was incompetence within the chain of command on the ship or possibly a reference from someone outside of chain of command.
I'd say it's
that
50-50.
made that work. Yeah, and it could be either one or it's not a combination of both. It could have been either one.
Probability.
Though, to be honest, if we have to look at the competence level of the Navy, then I'm not paying the Navy a compliment, by the way. You still leave with 800 single and come back with 400 couples. I'm just saying.
No, that's
Chances are pretty
submarines.
good. Oh, that's submarines. Okay, hey, man. Hey, it's 2018, brother. You don't have to worry about it.
I mean, not
It
to
is a
say
very
some
good.
gay shit doesn't happen, but
I'm just saying, when you're on a submarine, you can't be like, miss me with that gay shit. Where you gonna go?
yeah, miss me with that gay shit as we share a bed.
Yeah, miss me with that gay shit as we're living within 8 square feet of each other. But hey, just don't let the balls touch, man. You'll be okay. So, but either way, Jeremiah's never gonna let me come on his show again, y'all. But yeah, that's where we're at. Up to speed.
Yeah, I can only imagine how that watch team was like. Oh shit, an F-14. Put your dick away.
Oh God. Now the word. Oh Jesus Christ. Huh.
Yeah, but and I have no problem with discussions like this because, frankly, first off, if I'm going to invite somebody who's been in the military at all, I should expect at least like 10% of the broadcast to be dick jokes. So,
Yeah, well,
Mm.
that's pretty much
What's
10% of my career.
But beyond that, like, if this broadcast was just raw, like nothing but terrible shit that happened the past week, nobody'd watch it. So I do encourage this sort of flavor because I think the tangents are the meat on the bones. So,
Oh, by
but
the
yeah,
way, I think I may have found some of the reasons why the kids' story is being broadcast so much
well,
over here today.
feel free to read a link.
Right, so let's see. So we've got I've got kind of two possible options, basically. One that has to do with, hang on, I've got to pull up the thing from Discord I shared with you earlier. One has to do with Brexit and the Vote Leave campaign breaking electoral law, a charge that they have submitted a 500-page dossier to rebut, which, to be honest, looks like a big nothing burger to me, just on the face of it. I've read through the whole article and I just thought, well, it's a bit of a hearsay, he said, she said thing, and one side has now completely leaked what they were going to rebut with. So, for some reason, apparently, this is unheard of, even though I swear to God, every single good side does this normally because you get your word out into the public domain first, it becomes truth. That's just how it works. And the first one to the gate is the one people tend to believe. The second one to the gate might win in the end, but it needs a lot of power behind it. And they're really, if anything, there's more of a swing towards wanting to leave and make it proper. So I don't think I think that's just sort of a little red herring for me. I think the big one is the fact that the Prime Minister is in serious political trouble now. She keeps on pushing back against Eurosceptics in Britain who want to try and push away from any customs union and actually most of them want to just go WTO and just say, sod the lot of you. And if they tariff us, then we just won't buy their products because there's a bigger export issue for Germany than there is for Britain in most cases. And let's be honest, when you're talking about the EU, you're talking about Germany. You're not really talking about anywhere else. You're talking about Germany.
Like how many? Let me ask you a quick question because you would likely know, and if not, you may have the numbers close. Do you know how many nations in the EU have an actual surplus? Because I know Germany's is in the billions, and I know there's a lot of others who are struggling pretty bad.
I think it's maybe just Germany and France, to be honest, had a budget surplus. And let's be honest, if you've got a budget surplus, you're doing it wrong because you're either spending way below what you should be spending for whatever there is, and you're delivering something cheap, or you're taking away from other areas that need more spending. So for Germany to say it's running a budget surplus while all these countries are running budget deficits means that it should be donating that surplus and distributing it accordingly. I don't see that happening.
Well,
if the system actually worked the way it was supposed to, obviously.
Well, there's this joke that I saw. It was a little political cartoon comic thing. It had who was it? Krugman and Keynes walking through a rural district. And I forget who said it first, but one of them told the other, I'll pay you $4,000 to eat that pile of cow shit.
Said it to Krugman. Okay, go ahead. Yeah. I'm sorry. I love this. Go ahead. You go ahead.
Yeah, Keynes said it to Krugman. There we go. So Keynes said I'll pay you $4,000 to eat that pile of cow crap, basically, as a paraphrase. But and he said, well, I'll pay you $4,000 to eat that pile of cow crap instead. And so they walk away, their faces have a little shit on them, and we don't get to see it actually happen because it's a political cartoon, of course. And like I think it was Krugman who said, I don't feel any richer. And Keynes was like, yeah, well, you don't feel any richer, but we just increased the GDP by $8,000. So,
yeah, I love that cartoon.
So the way people think about numbers is largely inefficient, especially since it's not based on demand, but rather supply.
It only gets really inefficient when you start dealing with numbers you can't comprehend. Most of us can comprehend 1,000. I mean, you have to deal with that sometimes. Some of us may actually comprehend what 10,000 is in terms of money and can recognize it in terms of people when they see sporting competitions or protests. Very few people can recognize what 1,000,000 looks like. Very few people. It is something, again, Jordan Peterson highlights, but it is true. It's not something that any of us, unless we have experience of it, can really comprehend. And it's a bit of a mind boggler when you think about it, because those are the numbers at the moment that modern day society demand people get to in order to be comfortable. And they're numbers people are comfortable with anyway. So how anybody can perceive that working for 7 billion people on the planet, which is even harder to comprehend, is beyond me.
Well, and they don't see it working. That's the fucking point. They don't see it working. The only person it needs, sort of like bookkeeping, the only person it needs to work for is the person writing the books. So, like, you can rig all these bets, and you can make people think that their odds are something that they can accurately read and make off with, but really what it is it's a way to transfer money from the people who don't understand, from like those people to the pockets of people who do understand. So it's something to remember, that this whole thing is designed as a scam to keep very stupid people producing the majority of the way things work, and using them as a tax farm while they're at it.
Yeah, using the metaphor of a crooked bookie is a great analogy. And it's so accurate.
Very true. But let's swing back to the news article. This is from the Express. Now, I'll full disclosure, the Express in Britain is fairly right-wing. But if you're trying to find out what the hell is going on with the right-wing party, the closest thing to the right wing in Britain is the Tories, really, apart from a lot of weird affiliate groups. So if you really want to understand what most of the hardcore Tories are probably reading, this is it. So this is what the main line is narrating to people. Remember, all of these things are just stories. They're not that they have a grain of truth to them, but whether or not they're 100% true is always up for debate. Anyway, the Prime Minister is due to brief her top team on a new third-way compromise proposal for future customs links with Brussels at a crunch cabinet meeting in her country residence in Chequers on Friday. And her officials expressed hope that the blueprint, combining two earlier options that bitterly divided ministers, will be a deal that everyone in the country can support. But senior ministers who've seen draft details of the plan are unconvinced that the package can be sold to Eurosceptic Tories, according to Whitehall sources. One ministerial source told the Daily Express that the blueprint was not very encouraging. The source warned that a row over the document could split the Tory party and topple the government. I wouldn't rule out a general election this year. Things are very volatile at the moment, the source said. So, yeah. Thrones are rumbling, gentlemen. Thrones are rumbling. If the Prime Minister has 50 to 60 Tory MPs that she cannot square off, she's in big trouble. People stood on a manifesto to lead the single market and the customs union. They do not want to betray that promise. EU Exit Secretary David Davis and Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson are understood to be among ministers unimpressed with the early details of the Prime Minister's plan, which is largely the work of her Downing Street Brexit advisor, Ollie Robbins. Whitehall sources say the plan seeks to combine Mrs May's previous proposals for a new customs partnership with a rival proposal for a high-tech border system to allow rapid customs checks that was supported by Brexiteer cabinet ministers. And, sorry, I'm struggling to scroll. Right. A cabinet source said in the speculation, will there be fudge? Won't there be fudge? I suspect there will be. A new plan is understood to include a proposal that UK border officials will continue to collect EU tariffs on imports arriving from other countries outside the bloc that featured in the new customs partnership blueprint. So basically, we don't actually get anything cheaper. It's still going to have the same fucking tariff. It's also expected to propose a continuing alignment of regulations between the UK and the EU covering goods and agricultural products, but not the service sector, another feature previously included in the custom partnerships model. So, just to again add, basically watered down, we're still going to have the same nonsense that we had before. Idiocy. To assuage Brexiteers, Lay's blueprint set out a role for high-tech border monitoring system that featured in their preferred maximum facilitation or MaxFac model. Yesterday, ITV commentator Robert Peston said that the PM was preparing to put a plan to the cabinet for approval amounting to the softest possible Brexit. Jacob Rees-Mogg, chairman of the 60-strong EU research group of Tory backbenchers, says the emerging details of the customs plan sounds like, quote, a muddle and a, quote, deeply unsatisfactory non-Brexit. Now, for those of you who don't know, and I doubt any of you do because this is British politics and I don't expect any of you to follow British politics, but Jacob Rees-Mogg is about the closest thing to a libertarian I've seen in British politics in years. And it's quite amazing how free market he claims to be. Whether or not he means the actual free market or some sort of Keynesian bastardization of it, I'm not 100% certain, but he's an interesting character. He's very free speech. Anyway, the senior Tory MP said the third way is not leaving the European Union. He added, it would be a cheat on the electorate to stay in the single market. That doesn't just mean leaving it in name, but staying in fact. It means leaving the single market fully. This isn't a hard Brexit or a soft Brexit. It's just being honest with voters. I expect the Prime Minister to do what she said she would do. She is a lady of considerable honour and delivers on her promises. There is then a video of Corbyn slams May. She can't get a deal with her own cabinet. Mr. Rees-Mogg also. Oh, I might play that later, but I don't like listening to Jeremy Corbyn. He's it's hard to agree with a man that said Venezuela was a model society. Anyway, Mr. Rees-Mogg also hit out at pro-Brussels cabinet ministers, including the business secretary Greg Clark, for freelancing with views that are opposed to Brexit. The party should stick to its manifesto promises and leaving the customs union and leaving the single market, Mr. Rees-Mogg said. You had a speech by Greg Clark recently, which implied we were staying in the single market and the customs union. Cabinet wants to abide by collective responsibility, which is one of the cornerstones of our constitution. Mrs. May is refusing to circulate full details of the plan among cabinet ministers until Friday's meeting at Chequers. She told a weekly cabinet meeting in Downing Street yesterday that the Chequers gathering will finalize government position, which will be set out in a white paper policy document next week. Prime Minister's spokesman said, PM look forward to full discussion, which will take place at Chequers on Friday, where discussions will be taken on future partnership with the UK is seeking with the EU and the content of the forthcoming white paper. The purpose of the Chequers talk is to talk about the future relationship and the white paper. The intention on Friday is to set out further detail of our future relationship and deliver on the will of the British people. Package that we bring forward would be something that we would hope everyone in the House and the country can support. The European Commissioner President Jean-Claude Juncker said yesterday, we have been waiting for months now for the white paper from number 10 Downing Street, and we will analyze it once we receive it. So, as tensions grew among Tory MPs ahead of Friday's meeting, one pro-Brussels former minister accused Brexiteers of plotting a coup to oust the Prime Minister. Philip Lee, who quit as a Justice Minister during the Commons debate about the EU withdrawal bill, said, there's no doubt that Brexiteers are planning a coup. I call on other Rational Party members to stand against this nonsense. Mrs. May
Well, of
held a talk.
course, isn't it funny that they call them Brexiteers when the fucking vote worked? When the vote worked for a referendum, now they've got this fucking, like, it's sort of like calling the South fucking traitors in terms of the US, because like there was a vote, they decided theoretically that this sort of thing was something that they favored, and now they're being called Brexiteers, as though that's, you know, somehow participating in politics is only okay if you participate in it our way. And isn't that the truth, by the way? Like, politics in a general scale and on a general level, they're always about, like, it's only okay to do politics if you do it my way, and in doing so, everybody thinks that, you know, the other person is the worst person ever if they don't do it my way, proverbially speaking. And instead of having pluralism and, you know, a healthy, robust debate, everybody has to, you know, smear their opponent as Brexiteers or EU cucks or something like that. Isn't it great that the lower classes are always the one pitted against each other in a European superstate or any other sort of superstate?
Of course it is. That's the ones that you have to pander to the lowest common denominator, mate. And that is quite a large basis of society at our core. We want to believe certain things and not others. And this is the thing. I do like the reporting here because it is actually showing both sides of the story in a lot of different ways, because it's reporting just the facts, man. And I'm not actually seeing much op-ed coming in it, if that makes sense. It's actual news. So it's not necessarily good news for Theresa May at the moment, because I mean, she has not had a good week. Let's put it that way.
Well, I mean, so first thing, fuck Theresa, and second thing, or should I say bugger Theresa, since we're talking British, you know, and second thing is that it might seem like news because it doesn't seem to have a whole lot of op-ed, but keep in mind, like, half of news is what they don't tell you in order to craft their narrative. So that they might be telling you stuff that's like fact-driven and just leaving out enough facts that their fact-driven thing can still push an agenda. Just keep your eye out for that, you know?
Oh, of course. Now, Mrs. May held talks with Dutch Premier Mark Rutte yesterday as part of a diplomatic push to build support for a Brexit deal between Britain and the EU. Following their talks, a Downing Street spokesman said the Prime Minister then made the case for an ambitious and economic security partnership with the European Union. So basically, let's get more involved. She and Prime Minister Rutte discussed the importance of ensuring that trade between the Netherlands and the UK remained as frictionless as possible following the UK's exit from the EU. Geez, this woman, honestly, she also decided to speak up on the World Cup, and to be quite frank, I've realized now that she's she's in a lose-lose situation by discussing anything to do with football, or not discussing anything to do with football. If she doesn't discuss it and Britain wins, then she's not being patriotic. If she does discuss it, regardless of whatever Britain does, she's going to be called up on not focusing on the important things going on in the country. So she's damned if she does, and she's damned if she doesn't.
Or maybe she's equal, or maybe she's not damned if she doesn't, damned if she doesn't, and she has to discuss it because of the corporate partnership between state and business,
FIFA.
and effectively without, yeah, I mean, because fuck FIFA, you know, and I wrote an article on this a while back. FIFA is a hugely oppressive organization. They bulldoze people's homes. They instate basically martial law. And they destroy communities. They destroy the fabric of communities and gentrify areas to the point where they can't fund their own shit. And then a bunch of Europeans move into those areas because they seem like areas of economic prosperity, and the original natives are very much squeezed out. It's basically soft colonialism and friendly fascism. It's really fucking awful, and the governments usually support them the whole way because it's a huge economic surplus. It's a gigantic heroin hit of economic prosperity temporarily to the region, and basically they get addicted to that heroin, and then they're like, oh well, if we don't support FIFA, we're not being patriotic. Well, you are if you're patriotic to something that's not a super state with a megalomaniacal fucking dictator at the helm. If you want to operate in an oligopoly and an aristocracy, then absolutely continue on this route. But if you want anything else, then you've got to disconnect the sports, especially fucking FIFA, from the whole of your political schema. Otherwise, you're fucking yourself over in the pursuit of very temporary endorphins rush when your guy kicks a thing with his grass stained fucking feet into the fucking net thingy. It's really overblown, and it's goddamn stupid. From any other perspective than the perspective of an oppressive statist organization trying to profit.
Well, I don't know about all those big old words, but it's 4th of July. If it ain't America, I don't care. And football is what Bo Jackson played. Just saying. I'm kidding. Of course. No, your point is absolutely valid. I don't know about going to the extreme of saying that sports suck or intentionally pointing out that I don't know how they work, but I do point out that one that sports are a pleasant distraction. They are the bread and circus that the Romans came up with a very long time ago, just formatted for capitalistic purposes now. Instead of being an expenditure of the state to keep the people satisfied, it actually fuels that selective. The one thing commies got right is when they coined the term state capitalism. I shit you not. Or crony capitalism, It's the only thing these fuckers have ever gotten right. But yes, it does. Things like FIFA funds that because of the reasons that you mentioned. It intentionally props up, legitimizes, and provides funding to several different oppressive, horrible states, each one worse than the last. And of course, I include the U.S. in that for obvious reasons. We live here, we know what happens. So yeah, I'm kidding and I make jokes, but there is some very valid truth to that. As for gentrification, look, when the government is involved, then yeah, it's obviously a bad thing, as in the sense that you refer to it to. Gentrification doesn't occur naturally. That's just an improvement in the economy and a reaction of the market. A place starts getting nicer, people start fixing it up so that they can encourage people to move there.
Well, because here's the thing: like gentrification in this particular case, it has a very specific way it happens. They tear down the previous community so that the previous community cannot function, and then they install a bunch of stores that the average folk did not have the savings and the capability to invest in the products of. You
Not
know,
always.
and most of the time, and in this particular case,
he didn't
absolutely.
say always. He didn't say every instance of gentrification. He's referring to this very specific instance of gentrification, and he's right. In a free market society, in a free market society, gentrification is good. It's Compton in reverse. You know what I'm saying? So,
in a free market society, it wouldn't be gentrification. In a free market society, what it would be is it would be like private property owners taking a 0 area and making it a 1 or more. In this particular case, it's taking a 1 and taking the existing people, not increasing their economic prosperity at all, not empowering them to employ themselves and their neighbors and their friends, and not giving them specific jobs by default and de facto, removing their homes, removing their businesses, removing all this shit, clear cutting it to build a big fucking shiny stadiums with ghettos on the outskirts of them. And then they build all these fancy stores so that white people can feel comfortable when they travel there for the game. And then, you know, when these places start getting economic success, plenty more other usually European or European descended people come there too and build their businesses up. And it squeezes out everybody who used to live there because their economic state did not improve on a personal level. They just had this improvement that they could not then match pace with, and they can't afford shit anymore. So they lose their businesses, they lose their community. Ultimately, a lot of them starve to death unless there's a welfare program that gets set up.
Oh yeah, I agree with you 100%. I agree with every word you're saying. That was what I was pointing out, was that this is intentional state-sponsored gentrification. This is an intentional effort. They're physically removing, so to speak, undesirables so that they can replace them. And then when they replace them, like you said, with these higher end stores, they do these things intentionally, because putting an Abercrombie and Fitch store that no one can afford to go to, so they won't go to, is actually in the long run cheaper and more beneficial than hiring a bunch of guys with guns to be on the news shooting people. Someone should have told Israel. But yeah, you're exactly right. Well, and in that instance, there's nothing free market about that whatsoever.
Well, right, and then of course, like all these businesses, like especially FIFA itself, they make a whole lot of deals with local governments to include them in the U.S. hegemony, and as a result, you know, and by the U.S. hegemony, I'm including things like the UK and shit like that, EU, all these people who are basically partners and allies with the U.S. They get then protections in terms of whatever, as long as they install this football field. And then, you know, by football I am talking about, you know, football, but in the sense of like economic growth, the only things that grow were the powers that were already growing. It doesn't bring anybody up from the bottom, and there is no trickle down. So it creates a gigantic, huge underclass that otherwise wouldn't exist. And it's really fucking bad for the territories that they go to. Like, it's exceedingly bad. It's like a cancer that comes in, starts eating and converting cells, and then eventually you've got tumors and it kills the body. But the cancer doesn't care because it doesn't see any of that. It just sees the fact that it gets to grow and continue consuming. So it's really fucking bad. And that's, by the way, what people were talking about when they said capitalism is evil and capitalism kills. Because, like, if you make the case that Mao Zedong letting people die means that he was a murderer, which I do, then you got to kind of also make the case that capitalist countries letting people die and encouraging the other nations that help them let people die is also sort of mass murder. So everything's fucked, and it's because of the cancerous invasion.
I very, very strongly disagree with you on that regard. There is a similarity between what Mao did and what's going on here now, in that the similarity is that actions and responsibility taken by the state led to the death of people. And in that regard, you are accurate that these two things are the same. Of course, Mao is responsible for what he did. Because he assumed this, by he I mean the state that he's the dictator of, assumed sole responsibility for the distribution of, in this case, food, of goods and services, in this case of food, of people, and he fucked it up, and it cost the lives of millions and millions of people based on his idiocy, right? Or on his, I won't call it idiocy, the guy obviously wasn't an idiot, but on his ignorance. Okay, he didn't understand that birds are important because they eat pestilence. He didn't understand that. He made a tactical error, and therefore that falls solely on him. The reason he's a murderer and not just a person who made a reckless decision that cost the lives is because he assumed that sole responsibility illegitimately.
Has it ever occurred to you that Mao was part of a long line of family with, wars with other families, and that given the familial conflict in the region, like especially East Asia, that it basically created dynasties for millennia? That maybe this sort of thing wasn't an accident or a blunder, that it was specifically done on purpose so that he could ethnically cleanse the area for anybody who wasn't following his regime and his family's wishes. It seems much more to me like a mob tactic than a whoops, I guess I shouldn't have killed all those birds.
No,
possibly. If I had proof that he understood how the eco... Oh, I'm sorry. You go ahead. You got this one.
That's all right. So there's I think his name is Dakota. He basically is a professor of Chinese studies and linguistics, and I believe he actually got to look at some of the communist records because he wanted to report honestly about what happened, and the Chinese government were actually being quite open for a very brief moment in time about what they used to do. And he got a look-see and basically did lectures on just how bad Mao really was. And the problem with the Great Leap Forward, I believe, is what caused the famine. Now, that was incompetence. That was just pure incompetence because there was no way they could make it work. They basically denied people private property, if you didn't give it up, they'd kill you. And a lot of people did just go, you know what, fuck you all, and burnt it all to the ground. Same as they did in Russia. It's a pattern that emerges when this shit happens. When the distributions started happening, they piled it up in massive silos and shitloads of the food rotted, just like it did in India not that long ago. These are lessons that people can learn from if they knew they existed. The distribution basically made it to the point where if you didn't work a certain amount, you wouldn't get fed properly. So you'd then be low on fuel for the next day. So you couldn't work as hard. So you'd produce even less. So you'd get fed less. And the cycle would continue constantly. There was getting cases of people basically eating white clay because it made them feel full. And then they would die because they wouldn't actually be able to shit anymore because the clay would harden in their intestines and they just basically have an impenetrable blockage and die in the gutter. And millions died of starvation. And that was just sheer negligence by the state. So they came up, I think, with the Cultural Revolution after that. And that's when they committed mass murder.
Well, let's be specific. I mean, the famine specifically could have been stopped at any particular point by a change in policy. They did not change the policy. And to me, I'm not going to do that, malice, ignorance, whatever paradigm thing that people keep on trying to say I should. I'm going to look at this maliciously because they could have changed and they fucking didn't. It wasn't a matter of incompetence to me. when it's so obviously something that could have been changed and altered immediately. It's like, well, you keep on banging your head into that concrete, you're going to start to bleed, and then the person starts to bleed, and you're like, oh, well, I guess you shouldn't have banged your head into the concrete. Well, why'd you do that? Well, because I was trying to do X, Y, and Z. Well, it doesn't strike me that X, Y, and Z were very accomplishable by that. So what's the real reason? And then you find out that the real reason might have been that they were trying to end it all. I mean, if we're being very specific, you can't just say that this is incompetence if it has a very clear and possible positive outcome. I mean, it's like, at least in terms of what the elites would consider positive.
Well, this is the point,
seems
mate.
like a targeted famine, and it doesn't seem incompetent at all.
But this is the point. It was targeted at everyone in China by China.
The officials
is-
never gave up their property. The Great Leap Forward was not a was not a equilateral thing. It was not done on a level with everybody. The elites got to survive in their family dynasties while the poor people died. That is not everybody in China. That's targeted, and it's designed to get a populace that's easier to control.
Hmm. Well, speaking of China, I actually do have another one. This from BBC News for Asia. Wang Jian, China HNA group boss, falls to his death in France. This was reported 7 hours ago. Co-founder and chairman of Chinese conglomerate HNA Group has died in a fall in southern France while touring the Provence region. Wang Jian, 57, had climbed on a high parapet to take photographs in the picturesque village of Bonnieux when he fell, police said. Can anybody say suicided? Rescue services in the region were unable to revive him. Mr. Wang helped turn HNA into one of the world's biggest companies with assets in aviation, tourism, and finance. It has major stakes in Deutsche Bank, hotel chain Hilton, and skyscrapers in London, and employs more than 400,000 people worldwide. The company is currently in the process of selling down some of its international assets in a bid to reduce its domestic debt built up during a rapid expansion in recent years. The company, which has turned its website grey in a gesture of mourning, said it had lost an exceptionally gifted leader and role model whose vision and values will continue to be a beacon for all who had the good fortune to know him. How did he die? Police are not treating his death as suspicious. Mr. Wang was a party of 10 tourists visiting Bonao in the picturesque Luberon area on Tuesday morning, the French Bleu news site reports. He was near the village's upper church when he climbed onto a parapet at about 11:30 to take pictures of the superb panorama offered by the Cedars Forest, the site says. Speaking through their own interpreter, Mr. Wang's traveling companions told police it had been an accident. A local police chief, Hubert, oh God, I'm so sorry, the people of France, Hubert Mariot, was quoted as saying by Reuters news agency that Mr. Wang had been trying to get his family to take a picture of him when he fell. According to various sources, he fell between 12 meters and 15 meters. His widow was expected to arrive in the region on Wednesday, according to France Bleu. And there's a little bit on his business career and what he was doing. He co-founded a regional airline in China. His rise to prominence was actually a bit of a surprise. He defied stereotypes, apparently. He and his co-founder Chen Fang transformed HNA Hainan Airlines into one of China's most acquisitive companies with more than 230 billion in assets and a huge amount of debt. To many on China's internet, his death seems to have triggered curiosity. Just last month, HNA had to deny rumors that Mr. Chen had died. Authorities in France have confirmed Mr. Wang's death is not being treated as suspicious. Although he is not as well known as Mr. Chen in media, Mr. Wang is said to have taken the hands-on approach to running the company. This explains why H&A's dollar bonds fell after the company confirmed the news of his death. The success of H&A can be attributed to the savviness of Mr. Wang and Mr. Chen, but the future of this company might still in part depend on government policies. Last year, as Beijing started to curb financial risk posed by such debt-ridden conglomerates, H&A had to re-embark on a selling spree to pay down its debt. Now, I think this is quite important for a few reasons. One, it's always suspicious when a very powerful man dies in a very unusual way. And two, it's the stakes in Deutsche Bank. That's the bit that gets me. Because if anything is worth selling at the moment, it's probably Deutsche.
Well, and see that's the
trouble.
And see, that's a pronunciation that pissed me off today. Like, out of everything else, is that you pronounced it Reuters when you just pronounced Deutsche Bank, Deutsche Bank.
I meant to say Reuters. My tongue just sort of slipped on that one, if I'm honest. But Deutsche is not in a good state. If we're honest, it's really not.
Can you give us some background on that?
Right, so I'll see if I can pull it up because I saw it on Bloomberg the other day. Deutsche Bank fails stress test. So, yeah, 2 days ago, second round, and this is the second time. Okay, so this is the second round of stress test. It has failed. From Zacks.com. Zacks Equity Research, July 2nd. Deutsche Bank, U.S. subsidiary DB US Corporation, has failed the second level of Federal Reserve stress tests on qualitative basis. This is the first time that DB USA publicly participated in the Comprehensive Capital Analysis and Review Program. DB USA's capital plan has been rejected by the Fed due to widespread and critical deficiencies in its capital planning. Also, the reviewer found weakness in data capabilities and controls that contribute in Deutsche's capital planning process. Flaws were discovered in assumptions used in forecasting revenues and losses that might be incurred from its key business lines or in a stressed environment. The regulator also found loopholes in Deutsche's risk management area that included model risk management and internal audit. Sorry, I'm moderately stunned just how bad this is because I didn't look into it this much. I just knew it was bad. Deutsche, however, passed the test on the quantitative amount basis. The Fed concluded that even in a severely adverse economic scenario, Deutsche's common equity tier 1 capital would remain above the minimum requirement of 4.5%. It would not fall below 12.2% over a 9-quarter planning horizon. The regulator also found that Deutsche's Tier 1 leverage ratio would remain above the regulatory minimum of 4%, would not fall below 5.7%, which all of these bounded limits are very odd to me sometimes, but it's how it works. Deutsche has been added to the list of troubled banks. The market has been expected that it might fail this year's stress test. However, the stock gained 1.4% on the New York Stock Exchange's last trading session, reflecting investors' positive reaction to the German-based lender's promise to improve capital planning capabilities. In his press release, Deutsche Bank said DB USA Corporation has made significant investments to improve its capital planning capabilities as well as controls and infrastructure. DB USA continues to make progress across a range of programs and will continue to build on these efforts and engage constructively with regulators to meet both internal and regulatory expectations. I think it's probably just worth stopping there because that stress test is a shit show, to be honest. And granted, that's just the American corporate arm, but to be quite frank, when you're managing a surplus in the EU and you're failing abroad, it's not really a good option to have any more bad press. And this is pretty bad from a financial perspective. They basically barely get off on one side and don't get off at all on the other. Because the quality, basically an internal audit is basically the same sort of thing as us criticizing what the government does all the time. It's like we investigated ourselves and found ourselves not guilty of any wrongdoing. It's that principle. Okay? So that is how they're validating this shit at the moment. And model risk management basically means let's just let the computer model it. So, yeah, Deutsche is not in a very good state at the moment. And if this guy was planning on, because this guy apparently is planning on selling a lot of assets, if he had large stake in Deutsche and he decided, fuck it, give Germany a bit of a gut punch, and I would not be surprised if he would have thought, okay, this is a good way to actually flip things to China, and somebody just went, shove. Oh, shit. Sorry, mate. Oh, crap. I would not be surprised if that is what happened.
Well, yeah, and when you end up in situations like this, like the elites love this sort of espionage coming out to the public, because then they can get like all they need to do is move their assets elsewhere, and this bank can falter in stocks for a bit until it gets its shit together, and they can move their assets back when it's back up on the rise, so they can get rid of whoever they want, because nobody's going to be looking at it once they get back people that are evil and worse than this person. So even if this person basically just stopped playing ball if he was murdered, and the elites love a story like this because it keeps the people who are in playing ball because they don't want to fucking die, and it keeps the people focused on this one thing instead of all the corruption that probably led to the insolvency of Deutsche in the first place.
Well, I'll agree. The elites will basically have moved their money out of Deutsche already, if they had any sense. I know that Russia's been moving its money around back home in most cases, but I'm not certain what. If this guy was going to do anything, the most logical thing would be to sell Deutsche now while it's still solvent. I'm not certain how well it could weather a serious storm, especially if a major shareholder decided to go, fuck this, I'm gonna dump stocks. But then again, for all we know, Wang may have been advocating not to do that. And eliminating him might actually be the key move in allowing a Chinese company to trigger a massive collapse in Europe. It's a bit of gameplay, it's political theater, it's financial warfare. And watching it unfold is quite intriguing, to be honest.
Yeah, and I'm about to tweet this thing. The elites have lied enough. The elites have lied enough that exposing truth in a few of them changes nothing, because they can lie much more when people aren't looking, because they're focused on new information released intentionally to keep people's eyes away from hundreds of newer corruptions. Like and that's sort of the thing. Like if we find out, if this channel finds out one truth and exposes one act of corruption, they've done hundreds more in the background, guaranteed.
Well, I think I know one that's happening for Britain at the moment. My shenanigans alarm was triggered today when another nerve agent incident happened in Britain, apparently up north in Wiltshire. Again, BBC. 1 hour ago, a man and woman was found unconscious in Wiltshire, poisoned by Novichok. We'll talk about that in a minute if you want, guys, because I'd love to get your opinion on that particular substance. The same nerve agent that poisoned ex-Russian spy Sergei Skripal, police say.
Didn't they determine that wasn't actually nerve agent?
As I said, let's go into that Novichok in a minute, because I think that you're probably right on that one. And my argument is and always will be: if Russia wants to kill you, you're a dead man. End of. If they want to kill you, they will kill you. And they probably will use something radioactive, not necessarily a nerve agent. That's their usual motif.
Yeah.
Just saying. Anyway, the couple believed to be Charlie Rowley and Don Sturgis are in critical condition after having been found unconscious at a house on Saturday. Police say no one else is presented with the same symptoms. There was, quote, nothing in their background to suggest the pair were targeted, the Met Police said. Metropolitan Police Assistant Commissioner Neil Basu said it could not be confirmed whether the nerve agent came from the same batch that Mr. Skripal and his daughter Yulia were exposed to, but he said that the possibility was certainly a line of inquiry. Mr. Basu said no contaminated items had yet been found, but officers were putting together a very detailed examination of the couple's movements in order to determine whether they were poisoned. He added that members of the public should not pick anything up if they don't know what it is. We have no idea what may have...
Thanks.
Yeah. We have no idea what may have contained the nerve agent at this time, he said. The Counterterrorism Policing Network is now leading the investigation, working with the Wiltshire Police. England's Chief Medical Officer, Sally Davies, says, I want to reassure the public that the risk to the general public remains low. The Skripal episode meant officials had a well-established response in place, she said. As before, my advice is to wash your clothes and wipe down any personal items, shoes, and bags with cleansing or baby wipes before disposing of them in the usual way. You do not need to seek advice from a health professional unless you're experiencing symptoms, as any individual who's been significantly exposed at the same time would by now have symptoms. And it does have side articles for what are Novichok nerve agents from a regarding a Russian spy, apparently. And bear in mind, the location is a good 8 miles from the Skripal incident. So how it spread 8 miles, I'm not quite sure, but hey, that's apparently how far it went. Anyway, on Saturday, paramedics were called twice to the property in Amesbury, the morning after Mrs. Sturgis had collapsed, and later the same day after Mr. Rowley had also fallen unwell. It was initially believed the two patients fell ill after using possibly heroin or crack cocaine from a contaminated batch of drugs. The news that Novichok was to blame was confirmed following analysis at the Defense Research Facility at Portondown, Wiltshire. As a precautionary measure, sites in Amesbury and Salisbury, believed to have been visited by the couple before they fell ill, have been cordoned off. There is no evidence to suggest either visited the sites that were decontaminated following the poisoning of Sergei and Yulia Skripal. Local residents have been warned to expect to see an increased police presence, including officers wearing protective equipment. Security correspondent Gordon Correra said the poisoning was hugely significant as the public will be worried about public health. He also added that the most likely hypothesis is that the leftover Novichok from the attack on the Skripals back on March. Perhaps this is some of the Novichok prepared for the attack and discarded. Maybe somewhere like a park, a house, maybe these two came across it. He added it could give counterterrorism investigations new lead as to where the Skripal agent was brought and put together before the attack on the Skripals. Home Secretary Sajid Javid said his thoughts were with two individuals affected and thanked the emergency services and staff at Salisbury District Hospital. He said the events followed the reckless and barbaric attack which took place in Salisbury on March. The government's first priority is for the safety of the residents in the local area, but as Public Health England has made clear, the risk to the general public is low, he said. Tomorrow, Thursday, I will chair a meeting of the Government Emergency Committee, COBRA, in relation to the ongoing investigation. So, yeah.
They are really milking that for all it's worth.
Every damn penny. And they do their view of Novichok. It may be good to hear what the narrativium is currently saying about this. A former Russian spy and his daughter were poisoned by a chemical that is part of a group of nerve agents known as Novichok. France, Germany, and the US have backed the UK's assessment that Russia's involvement is the only plausible explanation in spite of Russian denials. So, right. They were developed in the Soviet Union. This is I'm pretty much going to go out now. This is probably pure grade propaganda. Okay. Number one, what do we know about this military grade nerve agent? Okay. Number one, they were developed in the Soviet Union. The name Novichok means newcomer in Russian and applies to a group of advanced nerve agents developed by the Soviet Union in the 1970s and 80s. They were known as fourth generation chemical weapons and were developed under a Soviet program codenamed Folian. Novichok's existence was revealed by chemist Dr. Vil Mizratov in the 1990s via Russian media. He later defected to the US, where he published the chemical formula in his book State Secrets. In 1999, defense officials from the US traveled to Uzbekistan to help dismantle and decapitate one of the former Soviet Union's logical chemical weapon testing facilities. According to Dr. Mirzayanov, the Soviets used the plant to produce and test small batches of Novichok. These nerve agents were designed to escape detection by international inspectors. Two, they are more toxic than other agents. One of the groups of the chemicals known as Novichok's A230 is reportedly 5 to 8 times more toxic than VX nerve agents. Which, if that is true, then those two guys should not have survived. Let's be perfectly clear, because VX is pretty much within 15 minutes your entire respiratory system, or 15 seconds, I think your entire respiratory system has failed. And you're basically choking on your own blood, I think, by that point. It's quite devastating, that one, if I'm not mistaken. This is a more dangerous and sophisticated nerve agent than sarin or VX and is harder to identify. VX agent was a chemical used to kill the half-brother of Kim Jong-un last year, according to the US. A number of variants of A230 have been manufactured. One of these experimental chemicals, A232, is reportedly used by the Russian military as the basis for the chemical weapon known as Novichok 5. Russian Ambassador UK Alexander Yabenko has suggested British authorities have identified the variant used as a script attack as A234. This BBC security correspondent Gordon Carrera said the implication of these comments is that Russia has been informed by the British of the specific agent used. But he adds, so far, the British officials have not confirmed that they have communicated this to Moscow or that A234 was the exact agent deployed. Based on public sources, A234 is one of the Novichok family of agents. Little is known about it, but the symptoms track closely with those eyewitnesses attributed to Sergei and UK Scruple, as do other similar nerve agents. 3. Novichok exists in various forms. It can be a liquid. It's often thought to exist in a solid form. This means it can be dispersed as a fine powder. Some agents are also reported to be binary weapons, meaning the agent is typically stored as 2 less toxic chemical ingredients that are easier to transport, handle, and store. When they are mixed, they produce an active toxic agent. One of the main reasons these agents are developed is because their component parts are not on the banned list, said Professor Seasons. 4. Some can take effect very quickly. Novichoks were designed to be more toxic than other chemical weapons, so some versions would begin to take effect rapidly, in the order of 30 seconds to 2 minutes. The main route of exposure is likely to be through inhalation, though they could have been absorbed through the skin. However, in powdered form, an agent might take longer to cause a reaction. 5. The symptoms are similar to those of other nerve agents. Novichok agents have a similar effect to other nerve agents. They act by blocking messages from nerves to muscles, causing the collapse of many bodily functions. Dr. Mirzayanov told BBC Russian that the first sign is to look out for meiosis, the excessive constriction of the pupils. Larger the dose could cause convulsions and interrupted breathing. And begins continuous convulsions and vomiting, and then a fatal outcome. So this is something that is like you don't normally survive. Dr. Mirzayanov said there were antidotes, atropine and athenine, that helped stop the action of the poison, but they were not a cure. If a person was exposed to the nerve agent, their clothing should be removed, their skin washed with soap and water, their eyes should be rinsed, and then they should be given oxygen. Could anyone else have made Novichok? Moscow has denied any involvement in the Skripal poisoning and demanded proof. Its foreign ministry says there has never been any research conducted on Russian soil that would bear the direct or even the code name of Novichok. With Novichok, said spokesman Maria Zakharova, was an invention of the West when a number of ex-Soviet scientists moved there in the 1990s, taking with them techniques they were working on. But on Sunday, the U.S. Foreign Office said it had information that indicating that within the last decade, Russia has investigated ways of delivering nerve agents likely for assassination. Part of this program has involved producing and stockpiling quantities of Novichok. The UK is dismissed as absolute nonsense Moscow's allegations that it could have instead produced the toxin itself at the Poltava Research Laboratory. The Kremlin has made similar claims about Sweden, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic, which have all been denied. Dr. Mirzyanov believes Russia had to have been behind the Skripal poisoning because Russia is the country that invented it, has the experience, turned it into a weapon, has fully mastered the cycle. Russian US and UN ambassadors insisted that development and work of associated nerve agents stopped in 1992 and the existing stockpiles were destroyed in 2017. The Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, OPCW, confirmed the full destruction of 309,967 metric tons of chemical weapons possessed by Russia. And according to the BBC, Novichoks were never declared to the OPCW. And they never formed any part of the regime. So apparently these are the only ones that escaped detection. Not quite sure how that works, but hey. Whether this has happened in the UK's Chemical Defense Laboratory is unknown. Oh, sorry, I missed a bit there. Novichoks were never declared by the OPCW, and the chemical never formed any part of the control regime, partly because of uncertainty about their chemical structures. It's quite likely that some of the government laboratories made minute quantities and storied their characteristics, and I think they meant stored their characteristics in databases so their identity could be confirmed at a later stage if found as an unknown poison in someone's blood, he adds. Whether this has happened in UK chemical defense laboratories is not known. A sample of the nerve agent used in the Salisbury attack is to be given to OPCW, the independent international body set up to stop chemical warfare, for analysis. It's called the use of the chemicals extremely worrying and said those found responsible should be held accountable. Meanwhile, chemical weapons expert Hamish de Breton Gordon has called for OPCW to be allowed to visit the Russian town where he alleged the nerve agent was made. A very good authority, the Novichoks were only ever made in Shikhany in central Russia, he said. Which seems odd because I swear to God that they said that there was a load of stock somewhere else in Russia. But hey, maybe that's just where they put it. So yeah, there's another Novichok scandal going on, and I don't know. Aaron, do you know anything about this damn drug? Because I'm not even certain it's real.
Yeah, I think I heard on Scott Horton that that was later determined to not be a nerve agent. That original attack. But don't quote me because I don't know what I'm talking about ever.
Jeremiah? Hello?
Well, so I think that actually, like, because first off, I'm not sure whether it's real or not, so I'm not going to speculate there. But that actually does slide kind of nicely into the story I was mentioning earlier, where the mainstream media admits FBI groomed terrorists for 4th of July attack and gave them supplies. So this is again from the Free Thought Project. Cleveland, Ohio. An innocent man is now facing terrorism charges after he was caught plotting a bombing at the 4th of July celebration and then arrested by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The only problem is that the plot was created by undercover FBI agents who convinced the man to agree to a role in the plan and then provided him with supplies. Demetrius Pitts, 48, is now facing criminal charges after conversations with undercover agents led to his arrest. According to the criminal complaint against Pitts, the FBI claimed that its agents reached out to him because he made comments on Facebook that indicated he may be interested in joining Al-Qaeda, traveling overseas for training, and then returning to the U.S. only to carry out an attack. While it's not clear what the comments from Pitts, who was reportedly using a Facebook account with a different name, stated exactly, it is clear that there was no indication he actually planned on carrying out a terrorist attack. In fact, a report from NBC admitted that there's no indication that Pitts could have carried out any attack on his own. FBI Special Agent in charge Stephen Anthony justified contact by insisting that instead of waiting to see if Pitts ever joined al-Qaeda and travel overseas for trading, agents were completely justified in reaching out to Pitt and trying to convince him to carry out an attack now. Law enforcement cannot stand by and wait for Mr. Pitts to make a violent attack, Anthony said. Pitts agreed to meet an undercover agent in person, and the criminal complaint claimed that the agent secretly recorded their conversations, which revolved around waiting to assassinate President Trump and planning a terrorist attack in Cleveland. I'm trying to figure out something that would shake them up on the 4th of July, Pitts told the agent. However, the complaint raises questions about how much Pitts even wanted to be involved with the planned attack, because he simply wanted to go look at the base of the ground where it would take place, and he wanted the other brothers who the FBI claimed were involved to fulfill all of the other parts of the plan. I don't want to meet all the brothers, Pitt said in one conversation. Now, what about the detonator guy, the agent asked. Now, I don't even want to meet him. Pitts replied, he has nothing to do with me. The only thing I'm going to be responsible for is going to look at the spot to scope out the scenery. In order to carry out his role, Pitts needed a bus pass to take him downtown and a cell phone to take photos of places that he would be that would be bombing targets, both of which would be supplied by the FBI. Given the fact that he did not provide any of the supplies needed for the attack, he did not want to be the one who carried out the attack, and he simply promised to provide a basic layout of downtown Cleveland. Proves that Demetrius Pitts was clearly not the ticking time bomb the FBI claimed he was. The report claimed that Pitts was sentenced to prison for a robbery in '89, and he pleaded guilty to theft in 2007. His latest run-in with the law occurred in 2016 when the state of Pennsylvania requested that Pitts be extradited on assault, robbery, and theft charges. Pitts has now been charged with providing material support to a terrorist organization because he agreed to use a cell phone and bus pass provided by the FBI to take photos of downtown Cleveland. Diana Studermeyer, Pitts' aunt, told USA Today that she was shocked by the news that Pitts has never been a violent person. He has had some problems with drugs and everything, Stoudemire said. He came up with his father, which is my brother, that was killed before Demetrius was born. His mother passed away while Demetrius was in penitentiary, so he's been having such a hard time. This is not the first time the FBI has used its undercover agents to befriend a man online who looks like he might be critical of the U.S. government and sympathetic to terrorist groups in the Middle East, and has convinced him to carry out an attack on U.S. soil so that FBI can then heroically arrest the suspect even if he refused to carry out the attack. In December, the FBI was credited with stopping a man from carrying out an ISIS-inspired attack after their undercover agents attempted to coerce him into it, but when he refused to carry out the attack, he was still painted as a terrorist, and he now faces up to 20 years in prison. Then in March, a similar incident happened when an FBI informant targeted a mentally ill man who agreed online to carry out an attack and was arrested as soon as he claimed he would accept supplies from the FBI. While the FBI appears to have intentionally sought out the men its agents befriended in all three cases, the agency chose to ignore several reports about a suspect who was actually planning an attack. The FBI received multiple credible reports that Nicholas Cruz was planning to commit mass murder in the months before the Parkland shooting. Less than 6 weeks before the shooting, someone the FBI described as a person close to Cruz reached out to the agency and desperately pleaded for their help. The person reported Cruz's gun ownership, desire to kill people, erratic behavior, and disturbing social media posts, as well as the potential of him conducting a school shooting. Yet the FBI apparently chose to focus on fictitious cases and did nothing to interfere with Cruz's rampage. That's the end of the article there. So, I mean, the FBI is well known to do this sort of thing, and is even better known to basically create things for themselves to stop. Same with the CIA and terrorism, and so it should be no surprise that a government would do something like this nerve agent thing as a complete false flag, because governments do it all the time and they get away with it.
No, I agree. Think of how many stocks would drop if they actually stopped terrorism.
Yeah, Northrop Grumman, fucking Raytheon, Boeing, fucking Lockheed Martin, all these agencies would just go down.
I mean, that to me is nothing new. The intelligence community creating situations where they can heroically stop it.
Well, and Lupin had asked me what I thought of it, so that's pretty much what I think of it. I think that I don't know specifically, but things like this always sort of make me mentally trend in the direction of fuck that and fuck you too.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, it's again the crying wolf story archetype. It's really getting played out quite heavily, and I wouldn't go so far as to say that Trump isn't affiliated with certain Russian oligarchs. That's potentially plausible. But would I consider them to have an influence on him, given the fact that he no longer has control over his own stocks and anything anymore? No, I don't really see that. He's no longer in control of his businesses while he is president, so I don't see why that would be useful in any way, shape, or form. If they tank them, they tank them. He's dealt with tanked businesses before and being in shit tons of debt. So again, logically, cui bono, there is none. So why? And it's these kinds of questions that people need to start asking about the media, because there are things to criticize Trump for, legitimately, like pushing tariffs everywhere, or the wall.
Or, like having this whole North Korea, South Korea thing when, G7 was just around the corner so that he could prove his whatever assertiveness. And doing all of that while Bilderberg is essentially planning war with Russia and China. I mean, that's not exactly pleasant.
No, it's not. But this is the point. You've got proper stories that could be told. And instead, they are basically pandering to psychopathy now. This is the idea of Trump derangement syndrome seems. At first, I thought it was Poe's law. I thought this can't be real. But the more I expose myself to that type of thinking, the more I think, oh my God, how can this is the most outrageous conspiracy theory I've heard in like decades.
Well, I
And
mean, here's the thing about here's the thing about Trump derangement syndrome. If you look at the tenets that make up that idea, that the presuppositions and the precepts involved in making that conclusion, like there's a Trump derangement syndrome, and everybody's going to be like, "Oh, well, Trump did it, so it's not fine." When Obama was in office, they had the same shit. It was the same shit. Only it was the Democrats excusing everything and the Republicans making everything Obama did out to be as though it came directly from Satan. And it did, if you look at things metaphorically and archetypically. But, realistically speaking, it's no worse or better under Trump. It was no worse or better under Obama. It was no worse or better under Bush. Except that it's getting gradually worse and worse because every time they decriminalize something like pot, they've already criminalized thousands or tens of thousands of other things. So, it's been getting worse, but it's not that one president is, the worst thing ever and the worst thing possible, which is what the derangement syndrome is. So there is Trump derangement syndrome, but it's a result of the polarization that's taken place to make every president the subject and result of a derangement syndrome of their own.
Well, I mean, I don't 100% agree that everything is getting worse. I agree that some things are getting worse because, generically speaking, over time, the world has become a lot better. It may not be going very well for America right now. I'm not going to deny that. It's going a bit shit. It's been going a bit shit for a very long time. It's just people are finally starting to realize, oh shit, it's really gotten shit now.
Look, in Israel, we have people shouting and chanting, death to Arabs. In like Arabic countries, we have people shouting death to Jews. In America, we have people who can't decide which shade of brown skin scares them the most. And in other countries, we have people who can't stop being afraid of the sky. Um, like we have an ever-growing internet of things spying on us everywhere, and people consenting to some of this spying in exchange for cartoon animals. We have a giant fucking security apparatus that people post their smileys and Facebook updates to and their tweets from, all funded by people like the CIA and Saudi Arabia, but nobody looks at their crunch base enough to realize this. We have a gigantic apparatus of legal restrictions that grow ever larger, even though a few of them go away temporarily sometimes. And we have an ever-growing war on terror, war on drugs, war on personal freedom that costs yet more money that the U.S. does not have because it's printed its economy into the ground, and therefore the economy of countless nations with it that rely on it for their infrastructures, their economy, and their public health. And the entire world is reliant on this system that is gradually shoving its giant metal dick down their throat and expecting people to still be able to breathe for air. Things are getting absolutely so infinitely much worse, and they're getting so bad, in fact, that people are like watching their TV in record numbers and watching things that substitute TV like Netflix and Hulu in record numbers, like watching YouTube videos like this in record numbers, which, by the way, if you want to go like do something to reduce the state instead of watching this video and you think that would be more effective, absolutely do that. I am not the be all and end all. I will sacrifice myself on the spit of public like health and safety if I have to, but realistically speaking, people's eyes are trained on shit to distract them from how utterly terrible everything is getting, and it creates this feedback loop of people who are breeding irresponsibly to raise irresponsible children who don't want to talk about politics because of how terrible everything is and how polarized it makes people. And in the end run, this creates a gigantic army of people who absorb resources blindly, who don't think about the consequences of their actions, and who blindly follow the authority of whatever seems to be serving their particular niche of society, and therefore empower these people to keep on doing what they're doing, poisoning the planet, killing millions, and getting away with it. And if that's not getting worse, I don't know what is, because yes, there are many advances that are taking place to make the lives of the average person easier, but the average person is completely disconnected from the costs associated with those advances and just treat them as a convenience to be used at convenience. And as a result, we live in a very plastic society where everything is single use. Everybody is very focused on their individual gain for a very temporary period, and nobody gives a shit about the future. So it's likely that things are going to keep getting worse and not getting better because nobody gives an arse enough to make things better. That's my opinion.
Okay, I respect your opinion, but that is true for the U.S. perhaps. I would argue,
and all partner nations.
I would not argue that is true for the world.
Why not?
Because I'll give you. I can give you a list of 50 reasons. Apparently, I found a website. I'll share the link on Discord with you. I've been firing a few over to you from the ones I've been finding. Hang on a second while I shoot this one across, because there's some compelling. Oh, what the frackety frack? Horizontal tabs. Piss off. There we go. So this is basically a list of things, of basically fun facts. In 2 decades, the proportion of people living in extreme poverty has been cut in half. 200 years ago, 85% of the world lived in extreme poverty. 20 years ago, it was 29%. Today, only 9% live in extreme poverty, while the majority of people, 75% around the globe, live in middle-income countries.
Okay, so like I want to say, after you're done with each one of these, let me fire back. I'll have something for pretty much every one of these if this is the stock of the kind of assertions that are being made. So continue.
All right. So in 1997, 42% of the population, both India and China, were living in extreme poverty. By 2017, that share had dropped to 12% and less than 1% for India and China, respectively. That means almost 750 million fewer people are living in extreme poverty in these two countries than there were just 20 years older. And let me add as well, when you factor in for crime, that is always had a strong correlation to poverty. So reducing that poverty has had a reduction in crime, which is actually 0.5. Violent crime rate has been on a downward trend since 1990 in the US. Just under 14.5 million crimes were reported in 1990. By 2016, that figure was under 9.5 million. And then you factor in all the fact that most of those crimes are probably drug related. You could even reduce that even further just by ending the drug war. So, I mean, there are steps that can be taken to dramatically improve society very quickly. It's just a matter of getting rid of all of this protectionism that we've been indulging in for so long. Life expectancy has improved significantly.
Was that the first one, like the poverty thing?
Poverty is like a shit ton of this, if I'm honest, but there's things like life expectancy, death
Okay,
rates due
well,
to natural disaster.
okay.
Um,
Let me be very specific about the poverty and, by extension, the life expectancy. Um, the poverty rates have dropped on a general scale for now. But given the fact that global currencies are all based on debt and debt that can never be paid back, these are all based on bubbles, and it's like the Roaring Twenties, only over a more protracted timeline. It's not exactly like this poverty stuff is permanent, and it's not like like we won't see a downturn after all of these swells. That's not how markets work, and it's not how economies work. So the fact that things might seem to be getting better in terms of poverty ignores the reasons it seems poverty is decreasing, and it also ignores the long-term impact of the poverty reduction measures, which are ultimately very, very fruitless and futile. And the life expectancy thing, yeah, sure, you live longer, but you live longer to be a bigger parasite on the planet than any other organism in history. And you get to absorb a huge amount more of the resources because life expectancy is only higher because it's artificially raised due to the fact that there's a huge amount of production going on. So that people, with that reduced poverty rate can buy more cheap shit made with, no life expectancy, so that if it breaks, you can just go to the 99-cent store again, or in your case, the 99-pence store again. And when you factor in all of these factors that people don't look at, the invisible hand, the spontaneous order of the market, yeah, it can look like like everything's roses if you don't factor that in. If you don't factor in the fact that all of these people are going to contribute to an eventual collapse that's going to kill millions, if not billions. But I don't. I'm not going to ignore the fact that these people don't think about their resource consumption, much less try to, reduce it. I'm not going to avoid thinking about the fact that plastic is, the result of digging up dead dinosaurs that will someday result in a complete collapse of the oil economy, which will result in a society covered in plastic with no way to use it. That's the stuff that's just floating on the surface and not buried in giant fucking idiocracy sized landfills. um yeah, that might look great, but it actually fucking isn't. And if you just look at the results without looking at how people got there, like feminists would love you to do, and ironically at the same time crony capitalists would love you to do, yeah, it looks completely fantastic, but ultimately it really fucking isn't. Go ahead. Your next reason here.
well, I mean, I've got loads here, if I'm honest, mate. The fact that there's been a reduction in infectious diseases, the
Right. So
Literacy
that people
rate.
can live, so that people can live longer and absorb more resources, thus hastening the collapse.
Reduction
But
of
go ahead.
nuclear stockpiles by 85% since the Cold
If they
War.
are, if they aren't lying.
Oh, come on, mate. You can't you cannot basically create a dystopia that
I'm not creating
isn't.
anything. I'm saying government lies. I'm not wrong about that.
I'm not. Yeah, but this isn't a government source.
It
That's the
doesn't matter.
point.
They're believing what the government says.
Who is this guy?
I mean, all these figures came from somewhere, and I'd reckon to guess that most of them came from think tanks supported or supporting the government. You know, the state structure funds a lot of the research that comes out with these cheery numbers, and it does that for a reason.
But if objectively
It's not objective.
on
He didn't include the opposite end of that spectrum. He didn't say why these things were the way they were or that they would have no negative consequences. This is
he
very
hasn't
specifically
implied.
designed. This is very specifically designed to be 50 ways the world is getting better. It's like it starts with its bias and then tries to justify its conclusions. It's not scientific. It's specifically designed to be biased.
It's designed to be biased. I'm not denying that, but it is highlighting. But I'm not being funny, mate. You are being biased against the idea that it is
Yeah, I'm a pessimist.
positive. You're a pessimist.
Yes.
So I'm
I'm
challenging your bias with the counter bias to see
Yes,
if
and I'm saying
bias is 100% founded.
and
a
I'm
lot of
saying
it
that
is sounding
so.
incredulity.
Sorry, what?
A lot of it does sound a little bit like personal incredulity at the moment. Like I disbelieve this is the case. You
Well,
have some
no,
valid arguments against why it is true that things are getting better because there are bad things going on at the same time. I'm not going to deny that in any way, shape, or form. I'm not going to deny that we agree on the cause. But we have to, if we're going to look at it objectively, we have to see what those values, the results give us.
well, I
It's
mean,
not actually saying what the
it's
cause
not
is.
possible to have 100% objectivity. Let's just get that out in the open. Everything that is my understanding is based on my projection of me and my current experiences onto the world. I can't be 100% objective, and if I tried, observing the subject would make it change. So, I mean,
True.
realistically speaking, I can't be 100% objective. And the closer I get to objectivity, the more I find that a lot of these cheery biases are covering up the pain and suffering and struggle that the world is made of.
What are your feelings on Steven Pinker?
I know very little about Steven Pinker. I couldn't
Maybe
really give you a good analysis.
okay. I recommend you look into him because he does make some very compelling arguments that over time human society has actually evolved.
Okay, well, it
And
can evolve and get worse. But either way, like, continue your list.
it's, well, I think at the moment, if I go, any of the things that I will bring up will not necessarily give us much information. I mean, some of these are ridiculous to me. Like the share of homes that had electricity in 1870 was exactly zero because electricity wasn't really established. Today, the proportion of people with electricity is 85%.
Well, right,
So,
and of course, the amount of people using that electricity for leisure is probably like monumentally larger than the people using that electricity to actively better mankind.
we're using it to actively better mankind.
Yeah, but I have less than 1,000 subscribers. And there are people who have millions of subscribers who use their electricity to put on Walmart outfits they bought of various fictional characters and make like hip grinding motions at one another. This is like really obviously fucked. Everything about it is.
Yep. Again, you're looking at it through the lens of America. Okay.
No, I'm looking at it through the lens of all countries, man, because America
No,
is at the head
you're not.
because America is at the head of the hegemonic table.
But just because America's at the top doesn't mean all countries are America.
Hegemony. Are you
It's not
familiar with the
homogenous.
concept?
I'm familiar with the concept, mate, but the world is not homogenous.
I didn't say it was. I said it was hegemonic. There's a difference. Agreeing to concessions, like it's basically agreeing to concessions to have a seat at a greater table, agreeing to concessions in terms of your nation's like cultural purity in exchange for protections from bigger nations. That's the essential nature of a hegemony. And that's exactly what this is. The US is at the head of the table in this hegemony, and it's a hegemony.
Okay, the predominance by one group within a society. That doesn't mean that it's what you're
Look up US
describing.
hegemony.
I think the US hegemony is in regard to the political system. It isn't regarded into the
That's how the world runs.
cultural. No, the world runs culturally.
The world is a result of politics. It's run by the fact that it can't. It doesn't have. Yes, it's run by the fact that it doesn't have to pay attention to spending, for instance, because it's got unlimited funds. It doesn't have to pay attention to debt because it's got ways to pay that back on an interest level without considering the vast numbers behind the interest. It's got ways to specifically control for interest, but not actually control for the massive downward spiral. And the politicians have created that system so that they have an unlimited pool of resources to pull from to govern people the way that they see fit, and to continue the property transfer from the lower classes to the elites. And this entire system is a very political one and very specifically designed so that the lower classes cannot revolt and would be very specifically targeted and assaulted if they decided to revolt. The entire world's culture has changed and bent around the political nature of things. That's why in Japan it's more like America than it was before they were bombed, because now Japan has a very good reason to not rock the proverbial fucking boat, and they got broken. Their entire culture got broken by the nature of politics. And politics has always shaped culture, because essentially, without politics, there wouldn't have been invading nations, taking slaves, and forcing them to, adopt the empirical way that the empire currently sees things. And they wouldn't have made eunuchs out of men so that they would be good palatial servants. And they wouldn't have made giant societies based on war and conquest, because that war and conquest wouldn't exist without fucking politics. I'm not just focusing on America here. I'm focusing on how America came to be and how it's not very fundamentally fucking different, much less better than things were before.
You see, I really do disagree. I don't think we can comprehend what it was like to have to worry about cholera and typhus every day.
Oh, dude,
I really don't think we. No,
okay.
No, let me speak for a minute.
Okay.
There's a couple. First off, I agree with most of what you said, except it isn't the politicians who are doing that. You and I both know that it's the lobbyists that deal with the legislation and actually crafting it.
Here's the thing. It's the lobbyist, the politician, and the average person who doesn't do shit against them. It's complicit. It's a giant network, and it's a symptom and a disease at the same time.
But on the second point, I really don't agree that politics controls everything. Politics is theater. That's all it is. It's really, really well-crafted theater.
And people watch that theater and do what?
They believe the play to be reality, but
so it's almost
isn't.
As though that reality crafting creates a society that can be controlled by the crafters of that reality.
It's almost that, yes, but it doesn't actually work that way.
I was being sarcastic. I do think it's that way.
It doesn't. It almost does.
I disagree. I think it factually does, and I think that a few of us can see behind the curtain.
The fact that a few of us see behind the curtain means it doesn't actually do it for everyone. It's the old adage.
I didn't say it didn't do it for everyone. I said politics shaped cultures historically. I didn't say we couldn't have a new paradigm. I'm trying to build that. But we have to acknowledge that historically and to the present, politics controls most of culture. It's all about adopt these cultures because we conquered you. That's it. It's ethnic cleansing, it's cultural homogeneity based on hegemony, and it's fucked. And it's getting worse.
But it's not homogeneous, and the non-homogeneous components are fighting back.
All right, let me just put it to you this way here, man. Because I know we're not on news anymore for some reason, but let me just be specific.
Well off topic.
But let me just be specific when I say that the societies, the amount of people, because of increased lifespan that existed before, under the auspices that existed before, those people are like half of one of the smaller nations now. The entirety of Rome could fit in like California at this point. The way that the way that things have been running and the way that society's been building up instead of sprawling out. So we're not talking about homogeneity on a global level, and we weren't even talking about it in reference to Rome, which was one of the empires people bring up as a gigantic fucking unstoppable empire that fell in a day, blah blah. We're talking about you know, countless Romes, and there's enough homogeneity that there's enough people who could fight each other that resistance is hugely cost non-productive. And so reasonably speaking, you can have enough homogeneity in enough centers of society that the only conflicts that ever arise are conflicts that benefit the elites. And that sort of thing is what works to create a hegemonic structure, where as long as you respect enough of somebody's culture, you can trample on the rest as long as they don't get bombed by that other guy who you're more scared of. Or in this particular case, because we're talking about the U.S. empire with the greatest nuclear might on the planet, or, you know, the greatest military force, or the greatest blah, 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 you know, some Trump thing. We're talking about will simply fuck you up if you step out of line. We're talking about a group of people who will destroy you for fun and then go to Taco Bell afterward. This is not a matter of like there's pockets of disagreeing people. This is not a matter of that culture isn't exactly like the U.S., so hegemony and homogeneity don't exist. It's a matter of specifically there's enough of it in enough different places that can be manipulated on a tribal and herd level. And as long as you've got enough herders, you've got enough people willing to push sheep around with a giant stick known as "we'll fuck you up if you don't do what we say," that creates enough homogeneity that there are countless Romes willing to do the bidding of one US. It's worse than ever.
I'm sorry, I just can't see that homogeneity. It's probably because I don't live in the US, to be honest.
It's also probably because you're not in one of the countries that are afraid of the sky. I mean, you want to talk about cholera and typhus. I'll talk about the place that, you know, is peppered with depleted uranium, where their babies are coming out with eyes halfway out the socket, which then bulge out and become bloody and unusable maybe 2 years later. I mean, I'm talking about like really solid shit that has just taken what was bad and moved it elsewhere. It's sort of like a giant landfill if you think about it, like where the average person is, you know, shoving all of their garbage to another place to not think about it, but it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And it exists more, and it exists more, and in more places, and in greater concentration. We just don't see the landfill because we live in, hey, the first world. Not just America, the first world. Most people are ignorant to this shit. I bring this shit up to most people, and they don't look at it beyond the fact that I'm just a crazy old, like, fucking bearded, long-haired hippie dude who's coming up to them and telling them to go buy land and get a tinfoil hat, even though I don't recommend those. Faraday cages are better. I get this a lot from people.
Dude,
so
you don't
I'm
have
not
the
just
right
talking
to say
about
you're
like,
old.
Okay, yeah, I might not be old, but I'm talking about this in terms of like people who assume my age to be much longer than it is. I'll put it that way. Like I get people who think I'm in my like early 40s or late 30s, and it's weird because I'm half that.
Oh, I mistook it, to be honest. I thought you were in the late 20, early 30 ranges when you first told me how old you were.
Yeah.
And that was just an unusual result. But yeah,
It's because
yeah,
I've been looking into this shit from the negative perspective for a really goddamn long time, and I
yeah, I
understand. I understand I have a confirmation bias, and I'm not gonna try to hide that. But at the
you
same time,
really
I
do.
don't think I'm really wrong.
Okay. The problem I have with this argument is sort of the evolution of society from year dot, basically,
Okay,
has
yeah, sure.
significantly improved.
Yeah,
I'm
sure.
not claiming who does it though.
Society has evolved, but into what and why and for what future? Can society keep evolving at this sort of breakneck pace, not considering the consequences of their actions, treating the world like its collective landfill, moving its trash to the curb, and pretending that that manages the mischief? Will that last, or will everything end in rivers of blood and years of darkness?
Do you hear that the India banned plastics, by the way?
Yeah, okay, that doesn't matter. The rest of the world can still use them. India making a few
Whoa, whoa.
concessions. No, hold on. India
Okay.
like making one rule doesn't stop the rest of the world from still doing that, and it doesn't stop that country specifically. And by the way, they're phasing it out. They haven't banned it yet. Um, but it doesn't stop the rest of the world from continuing to be massively worse. It's a drop in the proverbial bucket, and it doesn't stop them from finding non-plastic things that are also bad for the environment. Like, fantastic, you're not using as much plastics, but you're actively using a huge amount more to mine for resources like rocks and metals to build reusable shit. Fantastic. You're not using plastics, but you just strip mined another hillside and put like 4 more species into extinction. I'm sure the planet loves you.
Okay, point of order. India is not trivial. It is at least 1/7 of the
I
world's
I
population.
didn't say it was trivial. I said that the
Well,
rest of the world can continue to be worse.
yes, I'm not saying that they can't, but other countries have picked up the same sort of motif. Britain
They have?
is, yes.
I thought the US pulled out of the Paris deal.
Well, that's the carbon agreement. That's a completely different issue.
Well, the Paris climate deal was just whatever the country said it was going to do. It just wrote it down, and that was pretty much the
Yeah,
Paris Accord.
and there were places like Pakistan who didn't do shit in the deal and basically said we'll consider making considerations, and that was it. So I mean,
Hmm.
realistically, yeah, maybe they've stopped using plastics, but the rest of the world can still give a big fuck you to the environment and plant the American flag while they're at it.
But there's evidence to show that once the GDP reaches a certain rate in a country, that the people within that country actually do giving a damn about their environment. Because, funnily
I
enough, they like being able to breathe air.
I would argue that your previous arguments about pulling countries out of poverty, especially given the fact that China is one of the prime examples of that, and they have fake skies and suicide nets at the bottom of their mass production factories. I would think that realistically, you're sort of like being a performative contradiction on your optimism here.
Uh, Perhaps there is some of that. I'm not going to say that but I'm not that much of a pessimist, mate. That's the problem. I
I
like to
know
play a pessimist on
I'm
TV.
entirely dark. Like I'm entirely dark. I get that. I'm
I'm just
fucking the
trying to
asshole.
shine light at you. That's all. I'm just trying to shine a bit of light in your general
Well,
direction.
don't.
See if I can find some of the spindly tentacles and eyeballs flying around you. And all the Chaos Emeralds.
I can't look at it brightly. Like not until people start to look at it darkly. Like enough people have to adopt enough of the darkness that the world starts to improve because people realize how shit it is. And that has to continue on a scale because people have to not get comfortable after reaching a certain goal of less shittiness. It has to be like not a campaign that people sign a petition for online. It has to be something that isn't done on a legislative level by India. It has to be something done in the personal minds of the majority of the world, or we're all going to die, except the people who have bunkers.
That's actually fair. I will say I am
So
noticing that kind of sea change, though, in a number of ways. It's, I'm not saying there isn't pushback against it. There's a shit ton. But the busting pedo rings, the
maybe. Or maybe they're
mm,
just busting the ones where they can hang a scandal around some dude's neck so he doesn't, like, there's a line from an Immortal Technique song. They don't want me indicted because they don't want my dirty laundry aired when I fight it. Don't get my lawyers excited because what good is a law if you can't rewrite it? I mean, I think that's fucking perfect here because all these people were involved with the elites in these pedo rings. And sure, you can cancel a few of them so that you can prop up a few more, and you can hang that all around the neck of people like Podesta and Hillary so that you can like have your big ass scandal that everybody gets to kumbaya over and sacrifice a few people to the greater like evil of your pedophile scandals. But basically, it doesn't actually change whether or not they're forming and maintaining. It just means that they have to be more careful. And it's just like any other underground. The more careful you have to be, the better you're going to be at being careful. So they're actually, because they're not stopping the elites from being elites, and because the elites are still going to fly things like the Lolita Express, which, by the way, Mr. Drain the Swamp Trumpy Trump gets all pissed off whenever anybody mentions the guy who ran that fucking shit show. I mean, if you have all of these redundancies, what harm does a few of them going to the side do to the grand scheme? And if it's a grand organism, and if you start to think about this in terms of both biology and warfare, these organisms have already infected too much of the body to stop metastasizing unless the body gets dramatically different immunities. And that's going to require a lot of people looking at a lot of dark places that they've been trained their whole life to avoid looking at because somebody else will take care of it.
the problem I have with that argument is the majority of people, particularly in America, distrust their media. They really do. They, especially if they're independent or conservative, they assume they're being lied to now.
They distrust the mainstream media, but they also distrust the alternative media because of what's being called fake news. They don't know which media to trust, much less to trust somebody like me who's telling them how awful everything is. So,
Exactly.
but
But
carry on.
this is my point. They'll trust this discussion
Maybe.
because well, I'd like to think they would
We
because
have
it's
3 viewers right now, and that's pretty much the average for the entire stream.
I don't just go on the streams though, mate. I go via the like you have to look at it from like a month from now or a few weeks from now. If something kicks off, it may trigger a bunch of other events. Like you don't the problem with this kind of thing is it's fluid. It's very networked. And the more you broadcast
Okay.
it to people who pick it up, the better it'll be. But the one thing I will recommend is if you want to get more of a following, to really get it out there, you're going to have to modulate a little bit on how dark you present the world. If there's no avenue out that people can see and how good it can be, then things become a bit difficult for them to accept, or they won't want to accept it and they will reject it outright. It's that whole concept of highlighting the negative and then presenting a alternative solution to that problem immediately on top of it to say this is what they should have done, but
Right,
this is
and
what they did instead.
and to be clear, I'm going to start getting on that sort of tack. I'm going to be starting to make like much shorter presentations than 3 hours, and I'm going to be doing these sorts of things with a mind on keeping people focused on a possible like better future that they could have. Um, you know, I'm not trying to make the world a world of dismay. It just so happens that I'm not wrong if I claim it is.
Oh, it
Um,
is.
you know, so and I understand what you're saying, but there has to be a balance which starts at the negative, because otherwise you're going to end up with a world of people who are passive because at least it's not too bad. Well, holy hell, it's getting so much fucking worse, and it's extremely goddamn bad all this fucking time. And it's like that dog in the burning bar, where the author finally wrote a sequel to the strip, where the dog fucking puts out all the fire with a fire extinguisher and said, "Holy fucking shit! Why did I let it get this bad? Why? I could have done something to stop this." And then at the end, it holds its head in its hands and cries. I mean, that's a fairly good emblematic thing of how I hope people eventually get, but they're not there yet. So I've got to show them how their entire world is burning before, they realize that there needs to be a fire extinguisher in the room, much less one that anybody's bold enough to pull the pin on.
Well said. I mean, for me, I just try to point out, yes, shit's bad, but it's not all doom and gloom. There are things that are getting better. There are things that may improve. We don't know what the future will bring. None of us do. We can predict, we can make assumptions based on historical imperative, and we can look at the evolution of society and the evolution for the causes of war and the means of war and the whole 9 yards. And we can look at how all of these things have evolved. And something I'm going to be hopefully producing a finished article on mine soon, actually, is the whole evolution of society. Because it is significant how and why evolve over time. And they have throughout history. It's the why is usually predictable, but it's presented a different way in order to make it palatable. Like the why is usually resource or labor or contract. One of those three is a why for war. And the why presented has had to be changed over time from religion to kings to the glory of the state, God, king, all at the same time, to a reduction down to just the state. And then came what I like to call the wars that basically were started by peace accords and empathy immediately following, where we got involved in conflicts to deal with presentations of data or covert, where nobody knew the war was actually going on except the people there and people in the CIA. And now we only know about it because they've been forced to release the documents over time. And the most recent major conflicts have all been based on a lie that has been driven to trigger an amygdala hijack of our emotional responses in order to drive us to react very quickly and irresponsibly to the situation with violence and to approve of that. It happened in Iraq, it happened in Vietnam, it happened in World War One, technically for the US, and World War Two, if you factor in the fact FDR knew Pearl Harbor was going to happen and could have sent all the ships out, so nothing actually really happened there, or at least alerted them so they'd be ready for the attack. But he didn't, so that America could be dragged into World War Two. And it's that kind. We were isolationists and benefiting from it, and at that point, we then became globalists very quickly because we were hurt, and it had to be us that had to be hurt to drive that. Same thing for 9/11, to drive us into Afghanistan and the war in Iraq for number two. Number one was done by the Kuwaiti ambassador's daughter. So it's all of these little lies that have built up over time And with the benefit of the evolution of communication, we have managed to get the internet. And now everybody knows it. That thing is as important as the Gutenberg Bible was for proliferation of information, honestly.
Well, sure, but let's be real specific. The internet lets people like me on as well. And I'm talking about how, like, this is going to be worse than Revelations. I'm talking about how this is going to be worse than any sort of apocalypse movie anybody could imagine, because factually the demons are within us all. And unless we get a personal exorcism, we're going to lose. And the internet also lets people on like Alex Jones, who, among many other accolades, such as being the top water
Oh no.
was the person for who was famous for talking about chemicals feminizing frogs. Like it allows people like Rachel Maddow to have an entire army of people willing to parrot leftist paradigm. It allows for the beehive, a hive of Beyonce fans who will attack anybody who says her music isn't the most perfect, most woke shit on the planet. It allows for shit like Kanye's fans to who like either attacked him or attacked anybody who would attack him, which the majority was the latter, let's be honest.
Mm.
To suddenly latch on to right-wing politics because he said he likes the way Candace Owens thinks. It allows for the exchange of truth, yeah, but it also allows for post-truth, which, wouldn't you guess it, was discussed at Bilderberg this last year. So yeah,
Mm.
this could be a powerful tool in the hands of the right people to distribute the right information to the right other people. And it could possibly even form an informational zeitgeist that could uproot the elite's plans altogether. But let's be honest, it probably won't.
Okay. I'll posing a hypothetical here. Let's take one of those Jordan Peterson videos, the ones that really talk about individualism or something. One of the ones that's probably been viewed 1,000,000 times. Yeah.
Sure.
Let's take one of them. Again, we're going to apply that exponential expansion principle. Each of those people probably knows, roughly, at least somewhere between 100 to 1,000 other people. Yeah. Now let's
Sure.
average that out to say 500 or so. Just to make it a weak argument on my side, all right? So they know 500 people. So that's 500 million people that could be informed of this view in some sort of simplistic way that conveys the information. Because let's be honest, individualism ain't really that hard to get. It's just people think in groups, and they need to stop thinking in groups in order to get individualism. It's one of these sort of problems. We've been taught to think in terms of us, them, we, they, not in terms of I, me, you, that kind of terminology. This is how we are all taught to think. It's a function of the Prussian system. Let's be honest. And because of that education system, we've got this major issue in people understanding and having critical thinking. But there is a craving for that, because if there wasn't, people like Sargon, people like Jordan Peterson, people like Tinker, and all of these people who are trying to present what reality is actually saying to them.
Well, let me be very specific, because like I try to be specific. What you're describing is something that is very clearly laid out in that Killing Joke song, "European Superstate." Yeah, sure. It may seem like there's a variety of opinion, but it's only because every citizen is basically required to debate. They're required to take a position within a very narrow paradigm of left versus right politics. And that's the reason why Peterson is sort of making waves, because he seems to be outside of the paradigm to some extent, even though he still places himself on that paradigm. So does Sargon. So does all of these major, quote, intellectual underground people. They all still sort of stick to the fucking paradigm. The only person I can think of who tries not to stick to the paradigm and who tries to talk to a variety of fucking people is, and this is like mainstream people in this YouTube bullshit, is Joe Rogan. He's the only person who's like, and he breaks it down to the common man's level too. That's the secret to his success. He takes a very complex concept that somebody is explaining to him, and he says, and he like makes a sports analogy, or he makes an analogy to reality TV or something, and he tries to break it down so that the common person can get it and not be disrespectful to guests. And he's gotten that down to a fucking science with very few error points. He is the closest you can get, and he has the most popular podcast that still does not scratch the surface of the amount of people who just fall into the paradigm. So his audience still has a minority of people who don't fall into the paradigm, and his entire audience still does not account for like a remote modicum of the global population. I'd like to see this sort of thinking take an accelerationist position in the world, and I'd love to see this sort of thinking take a skyrocket approach. Philip DeFranco is getting close to a Joe Rogan status in that way, and he's starting to do interviews for that sort of thing. Tim Pool is getting reasonably close to Philip DeFranco, and I hope that all these people can drag shit up with them. But in the end, you know the fuck what? They're still a minority. And in that, you know, in that sphere, even that minority doesn't take away from the fact that as long as you've got a robust debate under a specific paradigm of spectrums that all benefit the elite, the elites still win. So unless we drag this paradigm up from the bottom and try to make it work on a broader scale to a greater degree that is workable for many different sorts of people, until we start building coalitions and starting to actively work against the paradigm as it stands, this will not get better. It will only get worse. And I'd love to see that change. I'd love to see it get to that point where the little meter bar seems to be trending over 50% and keeping on rising with very little chance of instability. But I don't see that happening, and so I won't say I see that in the future. I see rivers of blood in the future for reasons that I think are very stable and good. And I think that, you know, being adamant about that position is what gets people tuned into this show to begin with, because they can get the milquetoast perspective from anybody else, but they won't hear about how, you know, it might be acceptable to do very, very violent things in defense of liberty from anybody but people like me. And I, you know, maybe I'm just filling another part of the spectrum and I don't realize it, but I think the fact that I'm so actively suppressed by these platforms, and I think the fact that I'm so actively suppressed by the average person who, you know, wants to get their army of people on the left or right against me, I think the fact that the first PewDiePie meme review video had me in it because I'm giving the angry alternative perspective means that there's still a market for this sort of thing, and that's the market that has to become fruitful, because ultimately those many people that you say are connected to somebody's personal network, those people don't matter if that person's personal network is still like 80+% not giving a shit, or 80+% don't talk about that at this reunion. I mean, my most recent family reunion, I got, you know, like 2 people on board with what I was saying, and the majority of them were just interested in me not making the party any more about politics than it already was. And that's why I didn't get invited to the 4th of July fireworks today. So the majority of people aren't interested in a fundamentally enough change to mean a damn yet. That's what has to change, and if it doesn't, we're fucked.
Mate, we're gonna get fucked. This is the problem. The collapsitarian point of view, it will happen. The best thing that we can do is either swim as we go, invest in things like silver and gold, and actually have the physical metal in your hand, or try and fight it, or do both at once.
And I
Because
agree to that, but I also think that if we're trying to fight this on a cultural level, that isn't going to happen until people are willing to embrace the darkness within them and without them, and to realize that they've been groping in the dark for the keys to their chains when their keys exist in their mind. Realistically speaking, society is being held like a dog on a leash, and that's what has to go away. And people won't recognize that by you telling them that there's a point in the spectrum that is on that leash, that they can somehow manage to be a rebel within. Like, I made the point the other day that people who listen to that song Rebel for Kicks, none of them are rebels. None of them. Not a single one of them. The people who listen to Rebel for Kicks are into making as little effort as possible to make the world better. I can almost guarantee it. And, you know, the minority of people who aren't just going to let the whitewashed milk toast pseudo revolutionaryism that's pumped out by corporate America and the corporate elite across the globe taint their message, those people are a huge and vast minority.
perhaps I I find it encouraging what I've been seeing just from the various things. The fact that people, again, like Sargon, like Paul Joseph Watson, like Milo, like Count Dankula, all joining a political party in order to try and actually affect change and create an avenue for basically the internet to actually be involved in politics for the betterment of actual negative rights, which it's to me it was quite amazing to see that they basically got so fed up with it that you push a man's buttons enough, he will use what means he feels are necessary to correct the situation. Over here, the politeness factor kicks in and they go down the official route first, always. Doesn't fail, never ever fails. They will use the system because for them, it has worked. I don't think they realize how badly it has served them, but they have believed it has worked. And because they're all in bloody agreement that at a fundamental level it has worked, that is their reality. It may not be the objective one, but it's the one that they have accepted. And I try to convince as many of them that there is an alternative to that that works even better. And that route, because you can point out it's failed here, 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 and here. And if they had done this, 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 and this, which is only possible in a market, then all of that could have been prevented by having a bunch of systems competing against each other and the best ones winning. And that's how things need to work. They need to flow organically, they need to evolve. And the only thing the state does is basically try and restrict evolution. And that is how it has always worked. It's tried to lie. And it's had to evolve how it lies in order to make its objectives known. And those lies, the way that narratives are crafted, are coming to light. People are more aware of things like the Overton window. People are more aware of things like using semantic terminology to twist an argument or twist the narrative itself into a direction that is false. People are coming to a realization of this in a lot of cases, I think, because if they didn't, then I think everybody would currently be bombing Syria right now. When the preponderance of truth outweighs the preponderance of lies, and the lies no longer make any sense in presence of the other data at all, it becomes largely untenable to continue down that track for a time. It's like the Skripal incident. The lies just sort of built up over time. Things got a bit out of hand. It went all quiet. And now, a couple months later, it's got kicked off again. They thought everybody would have forgotten it, and they're going to remind everybody of it now. And the news has probably changed slightly, and then people go back to the independent media, go, oh, that's what it was all about. All right, fair enough. It's all a lie again. Or come up with a resolution of Russia did it. And I don't know which. We'll see what happens. I'm hopeful that people will realize that was nonsense and that this is possibly, again, I don't believe somebody in Russia would be this incompetent to not kill their target and poison loads of other people in the process. They haven't done it before like that. I don't see them doing it like that this time. That's more CIA level poisoning than anything else, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, let me be clear. There are always lights at the end of tunnels, and my response to my own tweet here, which I went over in the beginning, and for the people who haven't been here, my tweet was, the elites have lied enough that exposing truth in a few of them changes nothing, because they can lie much more when people aren't looking, because they're focused on new information released intentionally to keep people's eyes away from hundreds of newer corruptions. I sort of put an addendum on that. I quote tweeted myself and I said, there are billions of us compared to millions of elites. Let that sink. Being real, the elites have to find a specific way to get the lower classes grouped to focus on one thing and fighting each other. Because the real truth is, we outnumber them. That's the real truth. We could be a massive force for good. We could be a better force for good than the world has ever seen before. We could unironically win so much that people get tired of winning and want to go back to the old ways of conflict, sort of like they want to go back to the old ways of slamming phones on the wall when they're angry instead of having a cell phone with a breakable screen. There could be plenty of things that we could do to make things better. Most people just aren't fucking willing yet, and that's my argument. That's my contention. If we want things better, we're going to have to expose people to enough of the darkness that they realize how dark everything is, and then try to shine their own personal light, pull it out from under the proverbial bushel that the elites have embedded in their brains through their entire childhood and adult existence. We're going to have to be hugely burning bright, especially if we're going to conquer nuclear powers and get them to sit down and shut the fuck up instead of the opposite way that things have been working. That's that. But we could. There are billions of us. There are billions of lower classes, and there are only millions of elites. And I'm including their lapdog cronies in that mix too. You know, there's a possibility for huge and sustainable progress here. But that progress is going to probably be wrought through blood that most people are unwilling to spill because they're trained to believe that everything is fine through their copacetic existence of plastic and reality TV. That's my contention.
Okay. I'll quickly make a counter. And I think, Aaron, you seem to want to say something here at the moment.
I don't know. I worry that your message, I hear it, and I'm sure everybody else knows what you're talking about, but be very careful to make sure that you're not talking to different flavors of tyranny, I guess.
Oh yeah, and that's something that I brought up, by the way, on Shit Shooting Sunday, I believe it. No, it was this debate thingy that I had with I don't know, conversation. It was really a shouty argument for a good portion of the time on the Mad Libertarians channel. A while, like last Sunday, I think it was after my stream. No, it was Monday. Yeah, it was Monday, and we talked about anarchy, and one of them brought up Animal Farm, where the lower classes created, like, subverted the power structure by inverting it instead of by abolishing it. And I said that that was where their error was, in that they didn't abolish the power structure. They simply made it change hands. And of course, those hands are going to get greedy with power because that's what power does. It's the nature of power to corrupt. So,
yeah, an argument with an anarcho-communist I had recently comes to mind.
Moron.
I know.
well,
Yeah.
no, I mean, I know a lot of very smart anarcho-communists, and I make that point regularly too.
Oh yeah,
I mean,
definitely.
if you want to have the lower classes unite, Lupin, it, if you want the optimism you claim to want, then, you know, maybe don't assume that somebody is a moron because they're an anarcho-communist.
No. I didn't say they were a moron. I said the term is an oxymoron.
And
It's sorry.
Yeah.
I guess part of it got, like, blurred out by the fact that this is Google and it's faggish.
Yeah. I was not claiming they're morons. They can be highly intelligent, but the
they
term to
just
me
have
is an
like a few
oxymoron.
key
I
things.
don't think so, and I don't think so, and I know plenty of ways that anarcho-communism could work anarchically, and, you know, to be completely frank, the original anarchists were leftists, so let's not throw them out with the bathwater.
Okay,
Yeah.
fair enough. But sorry, Aaron, go on.
Yeah, I would never say that anarcho-communists aren't intelligent. They just I don't know how to describe them. Their definition of hierarchy is too broad, I guess, and it ends up failing to human nature, and preference. And I mean, a lot of them.
Tragedy of the commons.
Yeah, that too. I mean, but they can explain that away pretty decently. Like you were saying, Jer, anarcho-communism could work in small communities with like-minded people.
Oh, it could work in large scale too. There are ways to do that. I just, you know, I don't prefer it because I think that it's bad at hedging bets.
Yeah.
See, my problem with anarcho-communism is I don't agree that it can work at scale. Not without a
do.
state.
Yeah,
But
that's my disagreement as well.
That would be a topic for another time, though, to be
Yeah,
completely
yeah.
straight. Because, like, I could go on for hours because I've read the theory. Like, that's one of the things. In admitting that I could be wrong about everything, I sort of started to read a lot of leftist theory and found out that I was wrong about my assumptions of leftism. Not necessarily that I agreed with their conclusions, because I think their conclusions are often shit. But at the same time, I have to agree with some of their fundamental suppositions, and I see the parallels now that were sort of blinding me to ignore, sort of like the state capitalism versus state communism parallel that I brought up earlier, and the fact that starvation equals starvation.
And you know, I'm undergoing that process as well, having having been in a lot more arguments than usual with communists. I'm starting to get to the point where I'm kind of shying away from identifying as an anarcho-capitalist just because of the confusion.
Yeah.
And,
well,
the
I'm an
difference-
anarchist. That's the thing. Like, I start from that base level, and then I discuss good ideas. I don't care whether they come from a Cap or a Com. I don't give a fuck if they come from Sega or Nintendo. I don't give a shit. I'm going to, you know, support what seems correct.
Yeah, yeah.
See,
But the litmus test for any good idea is voluntarism.
Yeah.
If it's voluntary, it's fine. My only problem with communism is it approaches mathematically. It approaches the problem by trying to solve for a factorial rather than solving for a variable. If that makes sense, you're trying to solve for all of the problems of mankind for a community, and the smaller your community, the smaller the number of those problems will be, because there will be less people to have to worry about, and less opinions to care about, and less individuals to actually cater to. But once it gets to a certain size, the problems expand exponentially. And once it gets beyond a certain size, no one system can solve it. It has to be done by many systems. And the only way to do that voluntarily is with a market. If you don't have the market in that position to do that, you wind up with the state. And that is my categoric fear of any ANCOM society that grows beyond a certain point, is it will devolve into a state communist society very quickly.
Let me ask you, both of you, would you be interested in joining a conversation on Friday about this specific subject?
Depends on the time, but
What time
I
works
would
for you?
love debate. Mornings probably your time would be best for me, if I'm honest, because then I can do it while I'm waiting for, or I can do it in another room while my wife's working or something.
Okay, so so let's just say then, would 1 p.m. Eastern time work?
1 p.m. Eastern. It's about. Can we do any earlier? Is that a bit of an ask?
Okay. Well, how much earlier would you need it to be?
Ideally, I'd be looking at like 11 a.m. Ideally, I think.
Okay, 11 a.m. Eastern.
Yeah.
Well, I could do that. What about you, Aaron?
11 p.m. Eastern.
11 a.m.
Oh, 11 a.m. Oh, that's no, I'll be at work during that on Friday.
Okay. Well, I mean, because on that specific level, I could probably just go head to head, and you could gather your troops on the like communism could never work side, and I could gather my troops on the it could work side, anarchically.
I don't know if I don't know. Well, I'm not saying it can't work. I'm saying it can't work past a certain scale.
Well, yeah, but that's what I'm saying.
I want to make that clear.
That's what I'm saying, though. Because it can work at that scale, and I believe it can. It just needs to work with like large groups of hubs, essentially.
But those hubs then become like pseudo states.
You're talking about like worker syndicates and whatnot.
Yeah, like networks of certain agreed upon economies in that sort of way. I mean, if that creates many states, then they could equally argue that capitalism creates many state capitals because those businesses are in control of property and blah blah. You know, I mean,
the central tenet of communism is to abolish hierarchy, though.
Well,
yeah,
I mean,
so that creates a network hierarchy.
The central tenet of Marxist-Leninist communism. Plenty of leftist, like extreme leftist, like further left than Marx, ideas already existed, like the ones promoted by Prudin and Kropotkin. So I would advise to research those before coming to any specific conclusions, because Marx really got leftism wrong and communism too.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the first libertarian, the first libertarians, Prudin and Kropotkin. I'm not as familiar as I should be, but
so am I. But in similar situation to you,
yeah, the abolition of private property and the distribution of resources via worker syndicates and whatnot.
But again, it falls to the old value equation. If there's no such thing as hierarchy, then there's no such thing as basically a value judgment to base something.
Preference or anything.
Exactly. As soon as you make a value judgment, you create a hierarchy. Something is better than something else.
Well, let's be specific, and say that this is something we should table until a discussion.
Yeah.
So
because this is the exact debate I was having with one of them, and I'd love to expand upon it at some other time.
So what time works for you Friday, Aaron?
Friday, anytime after 4 p.m. Eastern time.
Okay.
I should be out by
we can do it like at this time of day on Friday. It's just
that works too.
Yeah, that can work for me. I can't do it for this long, but I could definitely do this time of day.
Well, then
like
let's say
the 11 o'clock sort of PM GMT kind of time.
Well, then let's start a little earlier than this. Let's just say we'll start at the same time that that we started today. Would that work for the both of you? And
that
then
works for me.
Sure.
And then we go for as long as necessary, and I'll see if I can get some people interested.
I will be honest, I can do for an hour. So
Is that all you can do?
easily, yes, maybe 2 on
We'll
the
have to talk
outside.
fast.
Because I have a strong feeling that it's going to go past that, especially given the fact that
I don't
we're
expect
discussing,
resolution.
well, especially
No,
given the
just
fact.
interesting conversation.
Hmm.
Well, I could do just hour segments and bring people back who were interested. It could be
Yeah.
a segment on my State Smash podcast, which I'm submitting soon.
Yeah.
On like what stateless like paradigms are most likely to succeed long term and large scale. We could do that.
Don't get me wrong, I will happily trade with an ANCOM if he's a voluntarist. I will happily trade with him provided he doesn't demand that I then concede to be part of his collective. As long as that's the case, I'm happy with any ANCOM
If he
trying
doesn't
out
view
his
my
ANCOM
private
paradigm.
property as theft and aggression.
Yeah,
Right.
if he
Well,
doesn't view me as stealing from him from owning my shit, we're cushy.
Well, let's then plan on 6 p.m. Eastern time Friday, and we'll see if we can get this at least somewhat hashed out. And I'll plan on an hour for
All right.
that being then, and we'll see if we can then reschedule another time if we can't get everything done. In doing so, though, I'm gonna have to make it somewhat structured. So I'll send you the terms between now and then.
All right, mate.
Yeah, that's fine.
With that being said, y'all for the people that weren't here earlier, y'all introduce who you are and where you can be found, and let people know what you're doing.
Yeah, on Twitter, I'm Cape Cod Piece. I mostly just shitpost. But I go on the Fagcast every once in a while, and I try to get to Jeremiah's talks as much as I can.
I'm Lupinate. You can find me on Minds and Discord as Lupinate, and on Steemit as an Arctic Wolf. I write mainly about reality and trying to conceive how voluntarism fits within it, and trying to present a nice balance to Jeremiah's nihilism.
Hey, I'm not a nihilist. I'm a solipsist,
Okay,
motherfucker. I could not even
solipsism.
exist.
Solipsism, then. I find that amusing, though, given the fact that we objectively must exist in some form because we're here.
Okay, well,
I'm talking to you.
but see, I don't know that, and solipsism presupposes that the only knowable form of existence is the self, and that the rest of this, the thing that makes up me, my arms, my legs, my fucking abs, which are slowly growing into things that have six packs, maybe if I exist, aren't actually provable. They're just peripherals with which we used to interact with the supposed outside world that we project our own meaning onto and therefore claim exists. But fundamentally, it requires a shit ton of assumptions, without which we fall the fuck apart and grow insane. So
I'll tell you one. I want to leave with one last thing because I just thought of something which I'll now have to write about and actually have another list of things to write about. Fuck's sake. Einstein always said that time was people don't understand time because it isn't like a line. It's you could think of it more like a circle.
Mhm.
It's it what you do now affects the future, but
See,
there
and
is
you
an
say
argument to be said the future affects the past.
and see, you said you're not a nihilist.
Oh, I am, but I'm a
Okay.
nihilist with some understanding that not everything is nihilism isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Well, of
Let's put it
course,
that way.
it's an embracement of the potential of mankind to be Ubermensch.
Yes, and nihilism can also mean that it can mean that everything can just be blown away and die and fuck it all. But that's if you take it to its extremes. If you
Well, and
just accept
Well, it's
This
also if
is-
you don't take it to its like every part of it to its extreme, because the other extreme there is that once you realize that nothing has inherent value, you can build from a much more stable foundation, something much stronger and more beautiful than otherwise.
Yeah, because it's the value that you put on it that gives it value. It's subjective no matter what.
Yep.
All value is subjective, which is yet another reason why communism doesn't work. But
Or it's maybe a reason why your objective analysis earlier wasn't objective.
potentially. This is the problem. It's hard to tell sometimes with evidence what is evidence and what is just interpretation.
See, and that's why I
But
choose the asshole route, because it normally works for me.
But if the future is affecting the past, there is an argument that solipsism is true, and we are all just basically plugged in to a massive AR game that basically is our past playing into our future. And one of us could be right, but I don't know if both of us can be right at the same time.
Well, sure we could. We're just PCs, player characters.
Well, that's the point. If we're both player characters and our future selves know what our past selves are doing, there's always that potential for feeding of information.
Well, right, but
Through things like
the
deja vu.
but the metagame is what's most fun if that's the truth. And either way, I have a game of D&D that I have to get to pretty much now. So be
Fair enough,
well,
mate.
everyone, and we'll see you Friday at the same time.
Take care, guys.
Yeah, I'll see you.